Good afternoon, everyone. Excuse me. We better do a sound check now that I'm fixed. Very good then. Welcome to the January 27th Committee of the Whole meeting. And welcome as we are convened on the Squamish Nation traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish Ohwameo. We have Councillor John French joining us remotely this afternoon as I am hard of hearing and a little bit short-sighted. Any help in pointing out where I've missed Councillor French would be appreciated. Now, could I have then a motion to adopt the present agenda before us? Mayor Herford, seconded by Councillor Pettingill. All in favor? Very good. Nobody opposed. Thank you. And the first step, we have a delegation from our planning department regarding the Garibaldi Estates Neighbourhood Plan zoning implementation. We budgeted an hour for this discussion. We have, of course, visited this topic several occasions before, but we'll see what outstanding matters we can clarify and remedy here in this discussion. Please go ahead then. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We have myself, Philip Gibbons, planner, Bryan Daly, planner, Jessie Fletcher, manager of development planning, and we also have Matt Gunn, policy planner online. He's not well today. So we'll all be available for answering questions as required. And today staff are seeking feedback on the new zones proposed for the Garibaldi Estates neighbourhood plan area. As the background, at the June 3rd, 2025 regular council meeting, council adopted the Garibaldi Estates neighbourhood plan, and the identified next steps in the plan are shown on this slide in summary. It includes zoning bylaw amendments to rezone land within the plan area to be consistent with the provisions identified within the plan. This includes land use, density, building height, setbacks, and lot coverage, to name a few. And it also proposes to repeal the Veterans Land Act bylaw to allow reconfiguration of property boundaries, which may include lot consolidation or subdivision, in alignment with policies in the plan. Staff have drafted new zones for the neighbourhood plan area based on the various land use designations, which were identified in the plan and are shown on this slide. Each area has its own zone to provide relevant regulation uses for each area. And along Diamond Head, south of Diamond Road, mixed use, as well as along Tantalus Road. And then most of the remaining areas are residential, except for the commercial areas on the west. Not all areas are have proposed rezoning as part of this implementation, such as existing commercial areas. And Bryan is going to take you through a summary of the proposed zones here.
Thanks, Philip. So the first land use designation we're going to cover today is the medium lot residential. The intent of the medium lot residential land use designation is to support a range of small scale multi-unit housing options in established residential neighborhood within walkable distance to various neighborhood services and amenities. The medium lot residential land use designation outlines the same zoning parameters as the existing R1 zone in place on these lots. As such, most of the regulations mirror R1 and can be found on the slide. The difference between R1 and the GE1 zone is the introduction of regulations for small-scale commercial units. Policy in the estates plan supports accessory commercial units on residential properties to increase access to walkable services throughout neighborhoods in the medium lot residential land use designation. So staff are proposing to include a new definition of small-scale commercial unit in the zoning bylaw and allow this use and the associated regulations in the GE1 zone. The definition shown on the slide has been drafted for small-scale commercial units, or SCUs. Staff are seeking committee feedback on this proposed definition, and if the examples of the commercial uses should be expanded or limited further. So some of the regulations associated with SCUs are that they would only be permitted on corner lots, only be permitted on lots with at least one principal building being used for residential purposes. They may be attached to a principal building or a detached accessory building. The maximum height of an SCU is 6 meters. The maximum gross floor area is 60 meters. No off-street parking spaces would be required for an SCU, which is consistent with the policies in the plan. Staff have provided stricter regulations in the initial rollout of SCUs than contemplated in the plan, following council feedback on the neighborhood node project. So staff are also requesting council direction on this approach, specifically as it relates to the level of permissibility currently contemplated. Next up is the ground-oriented residential, which is the GE2 zone. The intent of the ground-oriented residential land use designation is to support a range of ground-oriented missing middle housing options, including small-scale multi-unit housing and townhouses in established residential neighborhood within walkable distance to various services and amenities. A summary of the main zoning regulations can be found on this slide. Single-unit and two-unit dwelling remain permitted uses to ensure existing dwellings do not become legally non-conforming. A multiple dwelling residential and townhouse dwelling are also permitted. And the floor area ratio for townhouse dwelling is 0.6, consistent with the policies in the ground-oriented residential land use designation. A plan policy in this land use designation states that a district-led rezoning should be initiated for 2163 Mamquam Road that supports a maximum townhouse density of 0.7 with the provision of 27.5% of land adjacent to a public road as publicly accessible activated park space. Staff intend to lead this rezoning as part of this initiative. At this time, work is ongoing with a consultant to determine a density bonus that will achieve the stated objectives. The Local Government Act requires that financial feasibility analysis be completed on the proposed density bonus. Consultation with persons, public authorities, and organizations that the local government considers will be affected by the zoning bylaw is also required. Staff intend to consult with the development community on the specific density bonus financial analysis as part of this process. Staff have also requested that the consultant analyze if there's an opportunity to include a density bonus in the mixed-use residential zones. The density bonus would secure a proportion of developer-owned on-site affordable housing or a cash contribution to the Squamish Community Housing Society in lieu of constructing on-site affordable housing. This would establish a rate that would be paid in exchange for additional densities up to the maximum considered in the plan. Staff intend to engage with the Housing Society and the development community on the affordable housing density bonus. Given the current real estate market conditions, it's possible that no scenario for the mixed-use zones presented in this report are financially viable for redevelopment, even with bonus density. Given this possibility, staff have initially drafted the mixed-use zones with the lowest density considered in the relevant land use designations. So now we will move on to the mixed-use residential A land use designation. And the intent of this land use designation is to support mixed-use buildings on large properties along Diamond Head Road with apartments above vibrant retail uses that offer walkable services to the neighborhood. The GE3 zone permits a wide range of non-residential uses, similar to the downtown commercial C4 zone. A summary of the main zoning regulations can be found on this slide. Single and two-unit dwelling remain as permitted uses to ensure existing dwellings do not become legally non-conforming. However, there is limited flexibility with these lower density uses to incentivize the development of mixed-use building in alignment with the land use designation. Maximum height and lot coverage for the mixed-use building is shown on the slide. Lot coverage includes an exemption for publicly accessible open space provided above a parkade. The maximum floor area ratio is 0.7 and is increased to 0.9 when 100% of the units are secured as market rental housing through a housing agreement. And 20% of the floor area of a mixed-use building must be used for non-residential uses. While the policies in the mixed-use residential A land use designation support an FAR up to 2.0, staff are proceeding with the lower densities in the GE3 zone. Landowners with an interest in higher FARs identified in the neighborhood plan can apply for a rezoning application, which provides staff and council with the opportunity to work with the applicant to ensure the project aligns with the policies in the plan. Setbacks in the zone are the same for both uses, apart from the interior side setback, which is reduced to 0 for mixed-use buildings. The rear setback is 9 meters to accommodate the establishment of a 6-meter wide lane for parking and servicing access. To further incentivize the establishment of a lane, A condition of use associated with apartment dwelling use has been included that only permits the use if vehicular access is provided from a lane at the rear of the property. The front setback for the second story of a mixed-use building is reduced to 2.5 meters, provided it is above an activated pedestrian realm. Other setback reductions have been included for mixed-use buildings if land on the property is dedicated to the district for the purposes of providing alternative forms of transportation or a public lane, as contemplated in the land use designation. This slide with the blue highlighted properties shows where the location of the lane is envisioned at the rear of those properties. The next land use designation is the mixed use residential B, and there's two zones under this land use designation, GE4 and GE5. The intent of this land use designation is to support housing diversity in mixed use buildings and apartments on smaller properties near Diamond Head Road, with apartments above vibrant retail uses that offer walkable services to the neighborhood. This land use designation differs from the mixed use A residential land use designation to recognize the challenges for mixed use development on smaller parcels and parcels which may benefit from consolidation, and to encourage redevelopment of parcels that could support important transportation connections in the Diamond Head Road area. Staff have drafted the GE4 and GE5 zones for both of these. First up is the GE4 zone, which again permits a wide range of non-residential uses similar to C4. Single unit dwelling remains as a permitted use in the GE4 zone to ensure that the existing dwellings do not become legally non-conforming. A summary of the main zoning regulations can be found on this slide. Lot coverage again includes an exemption for publicly accessible open space, provided it's above a parkade. The maximum floor area ratio is 1.3 for apartment use only and is increased to 1.5 for mixed use buildings. 20% of the floor area of a mixed use building must be used for non-residential purposes. Apartment dwelling use is only permitted on parcels larger than 2,120 square meters to incentivize lot consolidation on smaller properties. On corner lots, apartment dwelling use is only permitted in mixed-use buildings. This condition was not applied to the other lots in the zone to reflect the challenges with development on smaller lots. Similar to the mixed-use residential A land use designation, higher FARs up to 2.0 are supported. However, staff are initially proposing the lower end of the densities considered. Again, landowners with interest in higher FARs identified in the plan can apply for a rezoning application. Setbacks in the zone are the same for both uses and are shown on the slide. A 9-meter interior side setback is included for two properties, one fronting Culloden and another fronting Mamquam Road. This is to accommodate the future north-south lane intended to provide the vehicle access to the properties along Diamond Head Road. To further incentivize the establishment of a lane, again, there is a condition of use associated with apartment dwelling that has been included that only permits the use of vehicular access is provided from a lane at the side or rear of the property. Next is the GE5 zone, which permits the same uses as the GE4 zone with the inclusion of 2-unit and townhouse dwellings, which are only permitted uses on the properties currently built out with this form of housing. A summary of the main zoning regulations is again shown on the slide. Again, lot coverage includes the same exemption if publicly accessible open space is provided above the parkade. Maximum FAR of 1.3 for mixed-use buildings is included. 20% of the floor area of a mixed-use building must be used for non-residential purposes. Again, the policies in the plan support a higher FAR up to 1.6, but staff are proceeding with the lower end of the densities in the initial rollout of the zone. The front setback for mixed-use buildings with frontage on Diamond Head Road is 0.5 meters and 2.0 for mixed-use buildings with frontage on Tantalus Road. The interior side and rear setbacks are 0 meters, and the exterior side setback is 3 meters. The rear setback is 0 meters given there is an existing lane behind the properties. Residential rental tenure section has been included in the GE5 zone as there are 2 properties currently subject to rental tenure zoning. The rental tenure restrictions have been carried forward to this zone. I'll now pass it back to Philip.
The Veterans Land Act bylaw regulates subdivision of land for properties shown on the map on this slide. Repealing the bylaw will allow for lot consolidation or subdivision in alignment with policies in the neighbourhood plan. The minimum lot area in the GE3 and GE5 zones was set to the largest parcel size in each zone, while the minimum lot area in G2 is 0.3 hectares, which is the consolidated lot size of 2 of the average size lots in this zone. This will allow for reconfiguration of property boundaries in alignment with the neighbourhood plan, and will not facilitate small lot subdivisions. Staff will bring forward a bylaw to repeal the Veterans Land Act bylaw when the rezoning bylaws come forward. Engagement, staff are proposing an informed level on the IAP2 participation spectrum. In-depth engagement was undertaken as part of developing the neighbourhood plan, and implementation directly reflects proposed provisions within the plan. A project page will be posted to the district website following this committee meeting, once any necessary amendments to the bylaws have been completed, and no public hearing will be held as per Local Government Act requirements. And the recommendation is that the committee directs staff to incorporate feedback provided at today's committee meeting into the Garibaldi Estates Neighbourhood Plan zoning implementation process.
Thank you. Council, as staff have related, there are 2 suggestions for desired council feedback. Firstly, the proposed definition of the small-scale commercial unit and the examples of commercial uses, whether they should be expanded or limited further. And secondly, the proposed approach with respect to stricter regulations in this initial rollout of the small-scale commercial unit than had been contemplated originally in the Garibaldi Estates Neighbourhood Plan, especially as it relates to the level of permissibility contemplated. So with that, questions, Council? Mayor Herford.
I'll take that, and I'll just point out that Councillor French has his hand raised online for you. So through the chair, just before, I'm really curious about this this process and arriving at the conclusion where we're going to, as part of this implementation, really pre-approve an FAR that's below what the plan supports at the high end, and just what the rationale for this approach is versus something that is either pre-zoned for the maximum amount or has some sort of density bonus that will get what have opportunity to impact what occurs on those sites and show a path to that piece without a rezoning process. So density bonus versus this approach, or I'm just curious about what the advantage of what's before us here.
Through the chair, so staff are taking this approach with the initial rollout, given that the plan does contemplate both ends of the spectrum of the floor area ratio. So we're going on the lower part of it. Staff are going to proceed with this exploring the density bonusing work to see what that outcome leads to. Obviously, there's, as you all are likely aware, the development, the current economic climate for development is challenging, particularly with mixed use and apartment typologies of housing. So staff are going to wait and see what the outcomes of that work are. If there's a density bonus that will achieve the goals that have been identified for securing that kind of affordable rental housing or a cash contribution, perhaps the outcome of that work shows that it makes sense to zone it to the highest FAR if you're getting the density bonus. So staff are waiting to see what the outcome of that work is, but otherwise we're taking a more conservative approach in the initial rollout. And then if a proponent comes forward and believes that they have a project that can work at the highest, then staff feel it's appropriate to go through a rezoning application and discuss that with council.
Thank you. I just, so when, I forget who was speaking to it, but to that district-led rezone on that one property on Malcolm, in that it said there was a comment about the financial viability needs to be there to support a density bonus regime, essentially, and so lessons learned there could be applied in like a next wave of implementation is sort of what you're we're thinking, or if the climate changes, that approach might be appropriate. Is that what I'm hearing? I just want to make.
Yes, I would say that's accurate.
Okay. Thank you. I'll leave it there for now.
Councillor French.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm curious about the creation of the laneway between Diamond Head Road and Culloden through this process. That looks to me like it'll be a long play and will take many years to complete. And I think there might be some people who are under the belief that this lane would look like the district coming in and within the process of a few weeks, just creating it. And I want to make sure that people are clear about what's happening there. So with that in mind, how does staff envision the first few lot redevelopments with the laneway sections on the backs of those properties? Like, are we looking at a scenario where potentially there could be a patchwork of lane segments that over time through redevelopment will come together to form the lane?
Through the chair, yes, that would be accurate. So the large setback at the rear would save that land for the lane. One of the pieces of the density bonus analysis for the mixed use land use designation is to contemplate that as well, so that that land is dedicated to the district, so that it would be owned for the purposes of a lane. And obviously, a density bonus would be kind of ideal for incentivizing that, because you're going to be giving up lanes, so you'd be getting kind of the additional, the density that you'd lose by losing lot area. But in the interim, there would likely need to be some kind of driveway access to the rear of the property, where that lane would be in the future. And that's, again, why the condition of use was included for apartment use, to try and have the parkades being accessed from the rear of the property, so that in the future, once all of the lots have redeveloped, then that lane can be established.
Okay, thank you. And the section of the report to council that deals with the Veterans Land Act, those properties, makes reference to small lot subdivisions, and we heard that in the presentation as well. And property boundary reconfiguration. So in this context, is property boundary reconfiguration the same and equivalent to lot consolidations? And am I interpreting correctly from this that future lot subdivisions aren't desired, while lot assemblies potentially are encouraged?
Through the chair, you could either subdivide or consolidate lots, but you must maintain the minimum lot size. The minimum lot size for those zones, which will be within the VLA area, as such that they will encourage lot consolidation, particularly for a townhouse type use.
Okay, thank you. And those are all the questions I have at this point.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. A few different topics, so just cut me off when you need to. Just getting back to this financial viability piece, I really struggle with this. My recollection is, several years ago it was 10% financing required, and now we're hearing it's 15%, and that really comes at a cost of what we can see in ACCs and CACs and so on. And it feels like we're being pushed into a system that protects the banks, and they're the big beneficiaries. The markets go up and down, but our zoning may sit in place for 10 years before someone moves, and the financial context may be completely different. So, like, who ultimately decides financial viability? Is it like, do we have any leeway to say, no, like we're comfortable with 10% bank financing and a sort of an assumed market, sort of the average of the last 10 years? Like, do we have to say, well, as of right today, when the market's terrible and the bank wants 15, that's what we have to meet? Like, who makes that determination ultimately?
Through the chair, so just some clarification here. The Local Government Act says that if you are going to include a density bonus in a zoning bylaw, you have to do financial feasibility analysis, and you have to consult with parties that may be affected by the zoning or the density bonus bylaw. So obviously, engaging with the development community is one of these stakeholders who you would rationally engage with. So in the last round of the last time we did this in the RM zone, We hired a consultant to prepare the density bonus proposal and the pro forma. We engaged with the Urban Development Institute for feedback on those inputs. And again, it's not necessarily like, it's not something that the province, reviews and provides feedback on. I think it just needs to be, it's a legislated requirement, like when you used to have to provide notices for public hearing and stuff. You just have to show that that work has been completed.
Okay, I'll just make a quick comment. Then I would not be super enthusiastic about, setting a viability target of 15% and current market conditions. I'd want a sort of longer range view and maybe not something that was as friendly to the banks, even if that was tough in the short term. And so if that required some discussion, that maybe is a future discussion. Just in talking about consolidation, lot consolidation, I think people would imagine, well, there might be a giant building, but we tend to have required pedestrian pass-throughs and so on. Can you remind me where or how that might be addressed? So maybe there is a large lot consolidated. Where would we address sort of building massing and pass-throughs and that sort of thing?
Through the chair, if they were to proceed under the, as proposed now under the lower densities, then that would be through the form and character development permit process. Obviously, if they go through a rezoning application, then that would be coming to council, and that could be addressed through that. And then I guess the other piece, speaking to kind of like the lane dedication, obviously there's going to have to be drive aisles providing access to the rear of the property in the interim until the whole lane is completed. So perhaps there is an opportunity to kind of have those used for pedestrian connections in the future once the lane is established.
Okay, thanks. And actually the lane is the next thing, and I sort of kick myself for not thinking of this sooner. And I wonder if there's any examples of this, because as I understand it, the idea with the lanes is that you put some of the loading and vehicle traffic onto the laneways, and then it's less on the front street. I'm not sure what that's not the proper term, but the street in the front of the building. But now you have we've just added another route for vehicles. And, part of my mind is there an option where we actually say, well, no, let's leave the street used by vehicles, put the parking there, still require the lane, but expect that is pedestrian active transit only. And so this new route we're adding is an active transit route only. And are there examples of that? Is there a reason why we couldn't or wouldn't consider something like that?
Through the chair, the plan contemplates some new active transportation along that frontage, and there's actually reductions in setbacks that contemplate that. So they're really trying to push the vehicles to the lane and make the road more for pedestrians. And maybe if my colleague Matt would like to jump in, he can.
Mr. Gunn. Then we'll go to Councillor Stone. Oh. You're muted, Mr. Gunn.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Gunn.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yeah, in terms of the, we did do some work to try and identify other communities that had put laneways in place, and there were some that, I think it was hard to find numerous examples, but there were some in Surrey where they had created a long-term plan and incrementally tried to work towards, I think, in a similar fashion that we are trying to do. But one of the pieces to try and support the eventual structure where we don't have a lot of transportation along, or a lot of private vehicles driving along Diamond Head Road for accessing the apartments, is that there's policy along the lines of what Bryan said, where there may be some accesses off Diamond Head Road to the lane, but once the lane's established, the policy speaks to closing those access lanes and converting them into either some kind of amenity space for the developments, or cut-throughs to access east-west in line with other policies to create those mid-block connections. So those accesses off Diamond Head Road are expected to be temporary in nature, although the whole development of Diamond Head Road would be a lengthy process.
Okay, I'm just sort of, imagining a place where on this lane, whatever the uses the kids can go out and play, hockey, street hockey or whatever, and there is no cars, right? You have to worry about strollers and bikes and stuff maybe, but that's it. And so it's just is wondering out loud a little bit if there's a way to sort of think of lanes, new access roads that way. I guess I'll pause for there and come back later.
Very good. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair. Just a contextual question. Appreciate that these were kind of identified as key next steps coming out of the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood planning process. But it's a different approach than, say, what we've done for Loggers East neighborhood plan, where we haven't actually done very much pre-zoning. And so I'm just wondering if staff can speak to why we're opting to do this level of pre-zoning as opposed to allowing individual developers to come forward for rezoning on a case-by-case basis.
Through the chair, I would say that the timing of the two plans is different. There's more tools available to staff now, such as amenity cost charges that weren't previously even a thing back when the Loggers East neighborhood plan came forward. Also, if the plan's going to develop as contemplated, particularly the mixed use land use designations, it likely requires the district to lead the rezoning to ensure that there's not much flexibility for uses other than the mixed use typology. So that's sort of incentivizing that form of development to come forward. If it's left at R1, there's the possibility that folks would potentially just proceed with a 5-unit building, and then obviously that's much less likely to redevelop if they go forward with that in the near term. So that is why the district has more tools, and the province is also pushing local governments to move forward with pre-zoning. So that's why this approach has been taken.
Okay, thanks for that context. I'm also curious about the laneways and the language that's included in some of the draft zoning that would require especially apartment unit forms to access from the laneway. But if I think of having a lot that is like mid-block, how do you do that in the interim if you have a 0 lot line on the side setback and a mid-block parcel?
Through the chair, well, if you have to access it from the back and you have a 0 setback, so you have to put your access to the back somewhere on the property. So then they would have to determine if it was going to be on the north side or the south side of the property, and there would need to be likely the narrowest possible lane providing access to the rear of the site where the parkade would be accessed from. It is a challenging scenario to attempt to zone for, but staff felt that this would be an appropriate way to roll it out. So you would, I see my colleague Matt has his hand up, so perhaps I'll let him take a stab at it.
Mr. Gunn.
Yeah, thank you. The expectation is that this will likely require consolidation of multiple properties along Diamond Head Road to create a large enough block where, as Bryan said, the developer, although they have the 0 lot line on the sides, they will have to make a choice around where they can put in their access point from Diamond Head back to the rear of the building and begin constructing the lane at the back. That would be used as the access off Diamond Head to get to parking and for pickup of solid waste, and also would be available for future developments adjacent to that property to access the lane. So you'd get some cut throughs on these consolidated properties that remain until a complete lane is constructed, and then at the end could be transitioned to another use.
Okay, thanks for helping me through that mental gymnastics. I'll give that a little bit of thought as we continue our conversation. I think I may have missed this, but can staff just remind me what the minimum lot size is in this area, and if we have any maximum lot sizes?
The minimum lot size in this area is 690 square meters. It's R1, but the VLA bylaw restricts subdivision. So there's this separate, very old bylaw that regulates subdivision. And I think there's only 2 lots that haven't been subdivided as they're allowed to under the VLA bylaw, but everything else has been.
And are there any maximum lot sizes?
There are not. So one thing to note is that lot consolidation does not require municipal approval. A landowner can go straight to land titles and do this. So that's why there's no maximum lot size.
Thanks for that context. And then lastly, I was just wondering if staff can provide some examples of what some of the density limits as presented in the zones actually translate to on an average lot size in this region. So in particular, there's like, for some of the definitions, there's a floor area ratio that's provided, and then adjacent, there's a maximum meter squared per unit. And my brain can't do that calculation. I think it would be difficult for anybody, lay person who's trying to read these zones to understand what that will look like. And so I'm just wondering if staff can help us figure out how we would explain that to somebody who's reading the bylaw.
Through the chair, there's a few ways you could look at this depending on what how many dwellings per lot, depending on ultimately how big each dwelling is. If you can imagine the R1 zone where people are typically trying to build 4 units, if you had a 10,000 square foot lot, that would basically enable you to reach the maximum dwelling size of 220 square meters. And we would equate to an FAR of somewhere around 1. For context, so an average size lot in the estates, depending on at a 0.6 FAR, might give you somewhere around 16 to 18 townhouses. I think at 0.7 it would be around 20 townhouses, and that it varies a bit depending on the ultimate size of those townhouses.
Okay, that's helpful. And if I just can allow a follow-up, the 0.6 that is presented in the draft bylaws, that is in line with some of our existing kind of townhouse style densities, or like where did that come from?
Through the chair, Matt Gunn might be better to answer this, but for some context in the community, townhouse development such as the Breeze is around 0.8 density. Many of the other townhouses that you'll see around the community are of a much lower density, but I'll get Matt to add some more context.
Mr. Gunn, in case you wish to add some comment here.
Yeah, no problem. There were 2 informing factors for the range, the 0.6 to the 0.8 townhouses that are proposed for the kind of broader area of the VLA estates. First off, exactly as Philip mentioned, we did a big review of all the different kind of current densities that we see for townhouses in town, and the Breeze is an example of a 0.8. It's one of the denser townhouses we currently see in the community. There's lots of 0.6 and lower. So 0.6 kind of matches a typical density we see in town. The 0.6 also reflected some design work we had done as part of the planning process. We hired architects to do designs on consolidated properties in the VLA, where we took multiple properties, put them together, and tried to achieve the outcomes that were highlighted by community members. So we wanted the single family character. So we wanted a set of houses facing, or townhouse units facing the street. And we wanted to preserve the mature trees that were at the rear of lots in general and create a fairly significant green space. And when we asked architects to try and take those 2 elements and create a design that ensured those would be preserved, 0.6 was what we were told would be something that we were confident we could get those outcomes and get a design that was attractive and preserved enough space at the back for the mature trees. There was lots of requests for higher density from landowners. And, we do have 0.8 in the community. So we said we will consider up to 0.8 if someone can bring forward a design that shows us 0.8 can achieve the plan goals. But we know 0.6 is viable, and so we thought that would be a good place to rezone. 0.8 could be proposed up to 0.8 if people, developers can show us that can achieve those policies.
Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think I'll continue off where we were there. I think on really this is the FAR and the density within the GE2 zone. Do I understand correctly that it is the GE2 zone is currently more restrictive in terms of density than the existing R1 zone?
Through the chair, that is incorrect. Only 5 units, they're called multiple dwelling residential, but for they're essentially townhouses, but you can only do up to 5 units under R1, whereas in GE2, you could do as many as you could get under the 0.6.
Okay, thanks. So, okay, that helps me reflect more deeply on it. I'm going to spend a minute thinking about that. And the other one, so in GE4, the maximum size for a single family, for a single dwelling, is proposed to be 220 square meters. And that's the maximum size for a multiple dwelling home in R1. So that's a significant reduction in the maximum dwelling size for a single dwelling unit. Can you speak to what the motivation is for limiting the size of a single dwelling unit? And I believe that's about half of the maximum dwelling unit size by law. I think that's 450 or so square meters.
Through the chair, the lower density uses in those mixed use zones were to incentivize the redevelopment to those mixed uses in the future. The uses continued to be a permitted use so that they're not legally non-conforming, the existing homes there, but really the vision in the plan is for mixed use in these areas. So the regulations associated with those lower density uses are fairly restrictive.
Okay, thanks. And now on to the SCUs, the commercial units. So the corner lot restriction was interesting to me. What's the motivation for restricting this use to just a corner lot?
Through the chair, the initial rollout was attempted to be kind of, very, not overly permissive. Obviously, corner lots kind of give a soft rollout, and they usually front 2 streets, so they're typically walkable. But this is exactly what staff are looking for feedback on. We're coming in with a kind of quite pared back initial set for feedback, so open for feedback on this.
Great. Okay, so feedback on that one. I don't understand the corner lot restriction. I think it should be opened up to any lot. And in that direction, opening up to any lot, the core difference between the GE1 and the R1 is really this SCU, right? Have staff considered switching this and just putting SCUs into R1 as opposed to having this one small pocket that's allowed SCUs within Squamish, just allowing SCU use throughout any R1 within Squamish?
Through the chair, that did come up as an idea. However, that wasn't necessarily aligned with what the policies in the plan state. It was kind of discussed to be in this neighborhood. So staff are following the plan, the plan policies on this. And if this was applied everywhere, obviously there would need to be more thought given to it. 6 meters would be particularly challenging to achieve in the floodplain. And yeah, there's just more considerations if there's a high FCL on the properties. But yeah, the plan contemplated this specific land use designation as an area for the commercial units to be rolled out in. So that's what is proposed.
Okay. If I recall correctly, the floodplain considerations were managed by doing R2, R3, and R4, whereas R1 all have consistent floodplain considerations. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I meant design-wise with one of these units. You know, if they have to be built to an FCL, if they can't be below the FCL, then they'd have to be up on a second story, and 6 meters is not a very tall height. So there would need to be adjustments to the regulations if this was going to be allowed kind of throughout R1. There's still R1 properties that are in the floodplain. They're just, so that was the consideration related to that.
Okay, but the FCL is independent of the zoning, right? Because it appears, so different properties in R1 can have different FCLs, which change where you're able to put the primary residence. So the same would apply for a commercial, small scale commercial unit, correct? So I'm trying to understand the FCL consideration here and how that's any different than residential dwellings within R1 with differing FCLs through the community.
Yes, so through the chair, if you think about accessory dwelling units throughout the floodplain, they're almost all built above the garage, and they would be taller than 6 meters. So the piece that I was just suggesting is that if this was going to be rolled out throughout R1, more thought would need to be given to the height, because if you could only build a 6 meter SCU throughout town, then that would, you know, while that could be possible in some places, it would limit its applicability elsewhere in town.
Okay, thanks very much. And I think that's it for now. I'm going to apply my mind more to the GE2 zone. Thanks.
Mayor Herford.
Thank you. That was actually a good setup for my question. I'll start with the 6 meters. Why the 6 meter on the SCU versus relying on the square footage and whatever the maximum, you know, the other limitations of the zone are? Like, why that particular piece?
Through the chair, these were, again, this was the kind of goal in this was to try and come with some reasonable regulations that were somewhat restrictive, recognizing that these could have kind of an impact on neighboring properties. So, you know, if you kind of, there could be unintended consequences with this, such as, you know, if you went kind of like a large 2-story, large massing building being built in the front yard on every lot, you know, folks would probably, that would probably require some engagement to see what the community thinks on that, because that could have an impact on the neighborhoods. And then sort of, again, with the uses that are permitted through these, you're introducing a commercial business into a residential neighborhood. So staff were a little bit, you know, thought about a soft rollout in the initial rollout of these regulations, and 6 meters seemed kind of less intrusive if it's being placed in a front yard. So again, if you're wondering what the restrictions are, it's kind of trying to mitigate the impact on existing neighbors in this initial rollout.
Okay, so thank you for that. I just, to me, the size restriction of just 60 meters squared sort of runs into this too. Like, I don't think practically we're going to get something that's more than 6 meters necessarily, but I'll leave that aside. We're being asked for the feedback on the allowable uses in these and so on. And could you run me through what the business and professional office minor is and how that, just like, what is that piece?
So that is an office use that doesn't require day-to-day clients coming to it, like a survey company or something like that, an architecture firm maybe, one where folks might have to come in for a meeting here or there, but it's not like a dentist office where you have a steady flow of patients coming and going. That's the designation between office major and office minor.
So those dentist office type things would be major, and that's the differentiation. Okay. I think I appreciate sort of taking learnings from other recent projects and incorporating them here. I do think I don't think I'm as far as Councillor Hamilton on these being more permissive, but I think we could go more than just the corner units here. I think the folks that I do think this is a very interesting option and could be something that sort of occurs organically where there's opportunity, and that opportunity might be based on who owns the properties more than where they're located. I understand the rationale around corner lots. I do think that some of that rationale is from a vehicle lens of exposure on multiple spaces. So I could go more permissive on the locations, but I do appreciate the restrictions on the uses inside of. So that's sort of broadly where I am through the discussion here on this particular point. Yeah, so I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just on the topic of uses, so the small scale commercial, is that inclusive of what I see in some of the other zones? That, like, from my reading, that would be inclusive of a small restaurant or cafe, personal services, a number of those things. In direct, maybe like you could do this as long as there's no noxious vapors and so on and so forth. Like, is that sort of a more, in the GE1, it's a more permissive under small scale commercial, whereas the other ones, we don't want to be quite that permissive. And so it lists just specific things that might otherwise be considered small scale commercial. Am I understanding these definitions correctly?
Just pulling up the definition on the screen here. So how this is intended to roll out is this definition for small scale commercial unit, which means the use of a building or structure built on a residential property to host businesses, which use is separate to the use of the dwelling unit for residential purpose. Small scale commercial units can be attached to a principal dwelling unit or detached accessory building or structure. And the uses include business and professional office minor, coffee shop, indoor recreation, personal service establishment, and retail, but does not include cannabis retail. So it would include these uses that are listed. So if you were looking for adding additional uses that you would want to see permitted in these types of buildings, then that would be feedback you would want to provide on this definition, which staff are seeking feedback on.
Yeah, thanks. And I may have some, I was just trying to, when I compare the zones and what's allowed, just trying to wrap my head around like small scale commercial, what fundamentally it looks like actually, as I see now, that the fundamental difference may be the corner lot limitation, whereas other ones, like, we don't say small scale commercial, like in, was it GE3, doesn't say small scale commercial, but it says restaurant, retail, some of the things that are in small scale. So like, just trying to separate like which ones are in which and why, and why we said yes or no.
So there's two different things here. This is a permitted use that is being added to a zone in the GE1 zone in the zoning bylaw. The mixed use zone that you're talking about is a completely separate zone that permits a range of uses. And it contemplates mixed use development on those. This small scale commercial unit is a type of use that doesn't currently exist in the zoning bylaw. The plan provides policies that support this, and it's initially being proposed in this GE1 zone. So I think what you're kind of looking at all these uses that are listed in the mixed use zone, this would be a use that would fall into that. It's not contemplated into that zone because that zone contemplates a mixed use development occurring.
So the GE1, then, that's exclusively small commercial and no residential. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's essentially R1, but it also allows you to build a small scale commercial unit. So you could have your residential home and you could build an accessory building that's a small scale commercial unit. You could do an addition to your home that's a small scale commercial unit. Residential is allowed. It has to occur on a property that has an existing residential use happening on it.
Right. Okay. I think I understand. I'm just trying to sort out like why these uses in this area and not those uses in other, like, for example, personal services, like where we said yes or no to personal services in various different ways. Why? That's what I'm trying to sort out more generally.
The definition of this, when it was being drafted, it was also kind of the neighborhood node commercial zoning was going on at the same time. So sort of there was some discussion about the uses that were permitted with that. So staff kind of used that feedback to inform this definition. And again, we're specifically looking for feedback on this definition. So if the desire is for more permissive, more uses that you don't see here to be included under this definition as examples, then that would be feedback that staff are seeking and can be incorporated before they come for readings.
Okay, thank you. And on that point, that's sort of one of the things, and noise is excluded right now in at least the small scale commercial. But I have a bias towards music related things, the studios, but there's a lot of film, content creation, photography studio, which I think many of those are ideally in a not quite light industrial, but semi-light industrial. And, I wonder, and maybe a zoning bylaw isn't the place to do this, but where sort of says, here's the generally allowed uses. However, if you invest in soundproofing or a few extra things, then these additional uses like studio space or whatever are also permitted sort of automatically. Is that something we would handle in a bylaw, or is there a reason why we wouldn't consider those kinds of uses?
Through the chair, that wouldn't be regulated through a zoning bylaw. Theoretically, if you were, incorporating soundproofing and stuff like that, it wouldn't be generating noise. So that would resolve the issue. Those kind of limitations that are included in the general regulations were pulled from the home occupation residential. They're obviously intended to reduce nuisance on adjacent properties. So staff thought it was reasonable to include those in these regulations in their initial rollout.
Okay, I'm gonna think on that a bit. I guess my high level comment would just be, I think the more flexible we can be, like we don't want to create a situation where neighbors are mad at each other, obviously, but the more flexible we can be, I think the more successful this will be, because people will figure out maybe better than us all the uses. And so I'm trying to figure out how far can we go in terms of flexibility.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. I have a couple of questions of my own. Firstly, regarding the provision for park space at 2163 Mamquam Road, the former Drinker property, we have had some concerns expressed by members of the public regarding park design. That is, to what extent this park can be designed for folks with physical disabilities, accessibility of the park. Would staff be able to comment on this concern at this time? Thank you.
At this point, the park has yet to be designed, so the density bonus work will need to be undertaken to determine what the ultimate zoning would look like, and then through the rezoning process, there will be public engagement on the public park, and I would imagine that there would be a referral to either ADP or our parks planning, so there would be feedback would certainly be received on accessibility of the park, and that would be kind of its own process as well.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. My second question is regarding the proposed repeal of the VLA Act, the Veterans Land Act bylaw. There are VLA lots scattered throughout the municipality. Right now, or for the purposes of or in our present information, we are focused on the VLA lots in the Garibaldi Estates area. However, there are VLA lots in Hospital Hill, North Yards, I believe. The ones I'm familiar with have already been subdivided. I'm just wondering whether these other VLA lots elsewhere in the municipality have been considered or are a relevant consideration for the proposed repeal of the VLA Act bylaw.
Thank you for that question through the chair. There may be other VLA lots throughout the district. There likely are. They are not regulated by a bylaw that restricts their subdivision or consolidation. This bylaw is very unique in that it's the only bylaw that we're aware of that does this, and it only does it for the lots within the estate as identified on the maps, which is why we're pursuing repealing it.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Council, other questions or comments and considering staff's interest in particular in the rollout of the small scale commercial unit provision? Any further comments Council wishes to add at this time? Councillor Pettingill.
I guess a question and maybe a clarification of one of my comments. In terms of the 2163 Mamquam park space, and sorry, it's not clear to me if this is an area where we might be considering zero setbacks, but just wondering when we're putting all these things together and there's going to be a buffer between development and a park, where does that buffer get absorbed, or how do we think about that? Or is that something sort of to be determined?
That's to be determined through the rezoning ultimately.
Okay, and then I guess just to clarify my comment, I guess my preference would be to sort of have some sort of understanding of, in the commercial uses we were proposing, the distinction to be based on sort of the likelihood of foot traffic, like the major minor business distinction and why in each space, major versus minor, hours of operation likelihood, or maybe vehicle traffic likelihood. And for me, those would be the sorts of things that would determine, I think, what sorts of commercial businesses. It's sort of really hard for me to wrap my head around right now of like personal service here, not there. Like I'm sort of looking for those higher level principles we're trying to address by saying yes or no for these specific things in these specific areas. And maybe there's a better way to conceptualize that, but it's just, for me, when I look at some of these lists, I do have trouble saying, well, why this is not that? It's not entirely clear in the different GE zones.
Councillor French?
Chair, I have a few comments that are specific to the requested bits of feedback from staff, if you want me to go ahead with that.
Please do.
Okay. My first thought is the use of the phrase coffee shop. I think that a better replacement term is cafe. Common definition is a small restaurant selling light meals and drinks, and the common definitions for coffee shop, really, they talk about actually referencing the word cafe. So I think that would be an appropriate change to swap out coffee shop for cafe. And I also have thoughts on business and professional office minor. The definition we use in the zoning bylaw is specific and doesn't reference a bylaw, while the definition for business and professional office major is broad and makes reference to a specific bylaw, 2190/2011, which I tried to find but gave up, and irrelevant anyway. So for our purposes here, I think this works. The key here is the small scale, and I think that the size limitations are strong regulators, or will be strong regulators of the use, and possibly stronger than any policy language. Staff has also asked for direction on the approach, specifically relating to the level of permissibility that's contemplated. And I have a preference for keeping the permitted uses broad to give entrepreneurs the flexibility that they need to figure out what will work in these small spaces. And when I think back to the policy work that was done on the commercial neighborhood node along the boulevard and how the commercial viability along that street is limited, this area is a bit different because of the proximity to the established commercial area that's close by, and a higher population density as well that's within easy walking distance. And so for that level of permissibility contemplated at this point, I support the approach that staff has brought to council. And specifically, we heard some discussion around the corner lots and having the commercial activity on those corners. I support that. I think that makes for a good transition from what exists now to what's envisioned in the future. And also what we have in front of us, I think, appropriately contemplates issues like odors, noise, and also addressing parking and setbacks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor French. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you. A quick question to staff. I think just for general clarity of how we envision the ACUs differing from home occupation uses, both kind of in zoning as well as in practice.
So through the chair, home occupation, one of the main differences is that has to be a business carried out by kind of a resident of the home that is accessory to the residential use. This could be, this wouldn't restrict it to the owner of the property. They are likely the ones to build it, but they could rent it out to anyone. So it could be any kind of business, separate from the owner. And there are this is more permissive than the home occupation. The types of uses that are allowed are certainly more permissive. Home occupation typically just has limits on not more than 1 or 2 people coming to the home at a time for business and things like that. So this would be significantly more permissive than that.
Thank you for that clarification. And so just generally some high level thoughts. I think the draft zoning, I had one other question. It's just in the GE3 zone that we've proposed a zoning density for market rental. I'm just curious why we haven't pulled that across, or is that still something that we're looking at in terms of the pro forma analysis?
That's something that we're looking at in terms of the pro forma analysis.
Okay. I will hold that for when it comes back to us. But generally, I think as presented, the draft zones do a good job of trying to put the high level policy into black and white of bylaws. And thank you to staff for walking us through the mental gymnastics on the different density approaches as presented. So no huge comments on the actual density components or the language in the draft zoning bylaw. With regards to the 2 areas that staff are seeking feedback on for the accessory commercial units, I appreciate the more conservative approach in terms of rolling this out. And I think similar to comments that I did make in the Garibaldi Estates, the Boulevard commercial space, I actually do think that we should continue to further restrict the uses that are allowed through an ACU, with the intention of it, again, being spaces where we see either day-to-day access to services and or places that connect community. And so I think home occupation is already allowed where it has limitations on 1 client at a time for things like personal service establishment, but I don't necessarily, I think when I was reading through anyways, and we went through the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood planning process and we talked about ACUs, I had a very strong vision in my mind of some of the examples that we see in Vancouver, in some of the houses that have been transformed into grocery stores or coffee shops or cafes, as Councillor French mentioned, not so much running a yoga studio on the front lot line of a residential neighborhood. And so I think to me that continues to be the driving force, is places that connect or provide day-to-day services for local neighborhood residents.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much. So comments specifically on those requested, the request about the SCUs. I would be supportive of removing the corner lot restriction. I think that there's maybe a dozen corner lots in that zone. So this is really, it's very specific and very restrictive with that corner lot restriction within just the GE1 zone. And going even further than that, I would support leaving the GE1 zone as R1 and moving the SCUs into the R1 zone, making it SCUs a permissible use in all R1 zones. My logic there is that I don't see why we would do it just here. If this is a sensible thing to do, we should do it everywhere. I don't see why this particular neighborhood has a particular reason to have an SCU enabled in it. And so my view is that it should be allowed in all R1. And my reason why R1 and not R2, R3, and R4 is the flood covenant pieces that I didn't want to get into. So that's the SCUs. On other pieces, I think that we should remove the maximum single dwelling size in GE4. I see staff's logic in trying to incentivize other uses, but I don't feel comfortable limiting the existing use to incentivize other uses. I think that we should not go below the existing R1 zoning on single family homes in order to incentivize other uses. I think that the existence or allowing the other uses should be incentivizing enough. On the Mamquam Culloden Laneway, that is a challenging puzzle. I think staff have come up with some creative suggestions here, and I hope that it can work. I'm sure staff can see lots of ways how this might not work, but I don't see any improvements that could be made to make it more likely. I think the overall plan is a good one. I think achieving it is going to be difficult, independent of what we do in terms of zoning. So I see that as the best we can do there. And regarding balancing FARs and density bonusing, I think that this is finding that delicate balance in our transition to the new ACC bylaw, while we can maintain the ability to achieve the objectives on the properties and in the zone, in the area, while reducing the amount of rezoning requested. So I see that as a delicate balance that needs to be made. But I think that staff have achieved to the best of their ability and the best that I can see that balance. So thanks.
Mayor Herford. Thank you. So the SCUs, I think just to restate my earlier comments around, I think the corner lot restriction is I don't think is necessary. I'd be open to something more permissive than that. I don't know that means maybe there is some rationale for being more restrictive than everywhere, but I do think that that we can be more open than that. I do see this as distinctly different than the area that we had just had this discussion in the Highlands, so I'm happy with the uses there. I do think that the Councillor French's suggestion around the cafe language was something that accomplishes that. I think would be helpful here. And then broadly, I see the rationale, and I've enjoyed the conversation here, and there's been strong rationale for what's proposed. I'm trying to link that back to the modeling and sort of the visualization work that we did during the neighborhood plan development itself, and I just wonder how we can support this as we communicate communicate out these changes to residents as to what they could expect there. I don't know if we have things that actually represent the FARs that we're contemplating here, because I think we were looking often to the maximum that was to be contemplated, and what we're approving here, or what we're contemplating pre-zoning to, is well below those maximums. And in some of the zones, what we would consider going to by way of rezoning versus what's sort of proposed to be applied to the property, there's quite a large discrepancy where some it goes from, I think my notes is 0.9 to as high as 2 in one case, another it's like 0.3 to 0.6 or something. Like, it's a very small difference. And I think some more work of just understanding how much we're leaving there and why would be helpful. And whether that's a communication tool or just part of the next phase of this, because I understand the rationale for the to not take on the sort of bonus structure, density bonus structure at this point in time, but how much we're leaving there seems a little, I'd like to understand that a little bit more next time around. But besides that, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Pettingham.
Yeah, thanks. And I realize I've added comments a few times. I just wanted to hear my colleagues and wasn't sure where I was sitting on all this. In terms of the small scale commercial, yeah, for me, I'd like a clear understanding of why we would restrict just to corner lots. To me, it's not obvious that we would have that restriction. I think I agree that this is something that could well be considered in the rest of the community, but I think for me, that's something that could be done subsequent to this project. I in the small scale commercial, I really like the idea or the concept of regulating impacts more than uses. Again, it's that sort of creativity, allowing that innovation. And it is the impacts I think we're worried about. And I understand it can be harder sometimes to regulate that as opposed to a use. But then I think when we go uses, we force everyone into very specific boxes that just may not work. And so the more we can sort of focus on regulating impacts rather than uses would be good. And no one's brought it up, but I did appreciate, and we talked about it with the neighborhood hubs too, some of our signage bylaws and regulations I think are really important to maintain still a neighborhood feel while having these commercial spaces. And so we're not talking about big bright neon glass storefronts and so on. This is still that's an important piece of this, and it's not in this, it's in our, again, signage and other bylaws, but I think highlighting and holding on to that is important. I'm really sort of, as I think about this, thinking when I lived in Hamilton and Toronto, and it was older brownstone neighborhoods, but you'd go and there's, a little cafe, a little funky used clothing shop, and all these little sorts of things. And you'd go through a walk through your neighborhood every weekend. There's always something different and kind of weird. And it was that sort of whole experience of getting out and meeting your neighbors and so on. And to me, sort of some of the retail things are a piece of that. And that's what I'm hoping we might see one day with this. I'm a bit torn about not going all the way on FAR, and it makes me wonder, have we not gone far enough with our ACCs if we're worried about the FARs? And because I am hesitant, if we stick with rezoning and CACs, we may not see a lot of the efficiencies we were hoping to get with all this work we've been doing. And so there I'm a little bit torn. And then again, really want to make sure that as we're doing financial viability and so on, we're not tying it all to current immediate market conditions, because I don't think that makes sense.
Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks, through the chair. Thanks for bringing this to us today. Just a couple things I wanted to weigh in on. I tend to potentially agree with Councillor Hamilton's comment about the SCU being on all R1. That could be a really good situation for the entire town, because to Councillor Pettengill's point, to my mind, what we're going for is creating community, creating culture in our communities. And I think having these like small walk-in shops and small businesses would be really great for that. Another facet of this is that commercial properties don't have any rent regulations in terms, like the same way that oh my God, my brain. But the same way that residential properties do, there's no control over how much your rent increases. So this could really be a way to create more stability for our small businesses as well. So I really like this idea of having more spaces opened up that are not like specifically commercially zoned spaces that we have right now, but opening up more options for our small businesses to operate out of. So yeah. But like building on what Councillor Pettengill said, like that's what I have in my mind when we talk about these pieces, is like creating culture and community in our communities. So, yep, that's what I had to say. Thanks.
Further comments, Council? Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, just briefly, in reflection to one of Councillor Pettengill's points, I do think it's important, just a reminder to my colleagues and to the community, as much as we can rely, hopefully, on the ACC bylaw that we're adopting, the legislation that was driven by the province doesn't allow us to capture affordable housing and or childcare, which we have determined as core priorities for our community in the ACC bylaw. And that's part of the reason why for larger scale rezonings, we have considered holding on to our community amenity contribution policy, and why I appreciate staff proposing that we do some of the density bonusing work in order to see if we can actually still facilitate that through this pre-zoning process, but ensuring that actually the density bonusing is going to go to the type of housing that we know our community needs the most, which is below market housing. And further to previous comments, I do think it is important that when that pro forma work is done, that we aren't just taking the current context in mind, but a historic average of what the market could actually bear. Thanks.
Mayor Herford.
Thank you. Just to conclude this, I'd like to move the the recommendation to,
Very good. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hamilton.
and I'm going to have my previous comments stand as my comments for this meeting. So thank you.
Very good. Any further comments around the table? Then I'll just suggest in summary that it appears that there's general support for the conservative or soft rollout approach being proposed by staff. There seems to be general support for greater permissiveness with respect to location of the small scale commercial units beyond corner lots. And there seems to be general support for the proposed restriction on uses at this time. There were some individual comments and suggestions made, and I just would hope that staff may have taken note of these. And otherwise, I'd just like to make the observation that it's quite evident to me that staff, since our last presentation of the Garibaldi Neighbourhood Plan, have engaged in a good deal of dialogue, careful deliberation, crossover with other adjacent initiatives, learning from them, and a good deal of research as well. So with that, I think we've had a good discussion, good use of our committee of the whole opportunity, and I'll then call the question. All in favor of the staff recommendation? Any opposed? Thank you very much, and thank you to staff. And I suggest we take a short break. I'm just going to check the time there. Would we be able to come back at 25 to 4? And we'll be underway with the presentation from Mr. Marrow and on the Subdivision Development Control Bylaw update. Thank you. Everybody, we're reconvened for the committee of the whole meeting and ready for a presentation from staff on the Subdivision and Development Control Bylaw, an update. Mr. Marrow, and if you could introduce our guests, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dave Marrow, Director of Development Engineering at the district, and I have with me today Nelson Chapman and James Kay from Alpine Civil Engineering Consultants. And we're here today to discuss the Subdivision and Development Control Bylaw update. So just to refresh, the recommendations from the report to Council are that Council 1 receive for information the report titled Subdivision and Development Control Bylaw, or as we refer to it as SDC Bylaw, Progress Update. 2, to endorse delegation of the administrative and technical engineering components of the subdivision, the SDC Bylaw, into staff level policy and design criteria manuals. And 3, endorse proceeding with industry consultation on the proposed updates. There we go. So I think we just missed one here. Sorry, this is a bit slow. So some regulatory context. The Local Government Act requires councils to set a minimum level of service standards for infrastructure servicing via bylaw. So our SDC bylaw regulates the provision of infrastructure works and services associated with the subdivision and development of land. And just for reference, infrastructure that we talk about, infrastructure works, includes transportation and frontage works, water and sewer servicing, and stormwater management works. So a bit of background on the bylaw itself and the project that we've embarked on. The SDC bylaw, we staff have done updates from time to time over the past number of years. These updates are undertaken to ensure consistency with technical best practices and regional standards, to respond to infill housing, land use, and legislation changes, and incorporate industry feedback, among others. Recent past updates have included minor administrative and technical revisions, and more recently, incorporation of downtown public realm and streetscape design standards. We'll note that the last major bylaw update occurred back in 2018. So quite a lot has changed in Squamish since 2018, both with the pace and amount of growth that we've seen, but also technical standards that we apply in our work. And with that, I will pass it over to Nelson.
Good afternoon, Council. So I'd like to just overview really as we began to engage with the district staff on what the key drivers of the need for this update were. As Dave mentioned, legislative changes, pace of growth. We honed in on 3 primary areas where we really needed to focus the updates, and I just wanted to walk through an overview of those 3 areas of the bylaw. So the main one would be level of service, administrative improvements, and then the meat and potatoes of the bylaw, the design and construction standards. So in reviewing these, the aims were really to modernize the bylaw. And when I say that, I mean most of these bylaws were geared towards greenfield subdivision, new road standards, as you put it, and they weren't really well suited to infill development challenges where you're refreshing existing infrastructure or dealing with some of the unique constraints with that. So fleshing out a process to differentiate between, to modernize the bylaw for infill, not just greenfield development, to improve the user experience for consistency, transparency of the process of that, as well as to just ensure that the infrastructure delivery aligns with current policy objectives and the growth context of the district. So jumping into level of service. When I say level of service, what I mean is really that minimum standard for servicing as a condition of either subdivision or development approval. So the degree to which that needs to be serviced by water and sewer network, stormwater management standards for management of rainwater on the site, or the degree that needs to be serviced by the road network or improve the frontage of that development. This is a really important concept the council table because it influences capital costs for developers, maintenance cost for the district, and the experience of the community as they use the infrastructure systems. The current bylaw was largely a one-size-fits-all approach. It didn't matter if you were a small development, big development, greenfield, infill. It was sort of painted with the same process brush, which was driving a lot of implementation difficulties for staff to right size based on the application at the table. So the proposed service levels of the bylaw, we're really trying to take a step back and pull from existing master plans, such as the transportation master plan, accessibility master plan, and recently adopted downtown streetscapes to establish that desired level of what we want the district to look like as it grows and redevelops. So the streetscape transportation standards were the primary focus was to ensure a consistent, safe, and accessible design in our urban areas with an urban streetscape. What I mean by that is curb, gutter, framed in boulevards and sidewalks, where then transitioning into more of the suburban or rural infrastructure where having a bit of a lower impact, lower capital cost, lower ongoing maintenance infrastructure touch to preserve that drainage and naturalized system, the ditch systems that are mostly effective without having to build a bunch of things in order to have that growth there. Water and sanitary servicing are largely remaining unchanged, mostly saying that if you're developing in the district, you must connect to the water system and the sewer system. Administrative improvements. Primary goals here were to streamline procedures for transparency, consistency, and processing efficiency. To have clear scaled submission standards for greenfield and infill development. So really what this is trickling down to is a workflow-based structure in the bylaws that if you want to come and develop or subdivide in the district, you can start at the top and work your way down and know exactly what you need to do and what the steps are. That sets up the bylaw well for automation and digital transformation and its implementation when you have clearly defined milestones and workflows within the process. And what it enables staff to do is right size the level of complexity to the scale and impact of the development. The other significant change that is being proposed is to delegate to staff some of the technical administrative details that are currently within the bylaw. And what this approach is attempting to do is strike a reasonable and effective and efficient balance between council's responsibility and obligation to define that standard of servicing and where that should apply, while enabling staff to take direction from that policy guidance and implement it based on their professional judgment and with administrative consistency. And the delegation of that is proposed to be the Director of Engineering and GM Community Services. So at the staff level, if housekeeping changes are to be made to these technical standards, they would run up the chain to those roles for sign off before it went live. Finally, the design and construction standards are proposed to be based on the MMCD, which is the Master Municipal Construction Documents. This is a widely adopted construction standards document throughout the province. It's not a provincial document, but it is a document that has been widely adopted throughout the province and allows for regional consistency, standardization in material specifications, supply, and is effective for ease of construction and predictability in the district. It is also proposed to be a standalone design criteria document, which would replace the current supplementary approach. So the current bylaw basically goes through all the headings and says, you know, do what the MMCD says except for this, whereas this one fills that in and is standalone. What that is intended to do is have the district be more in charge of what its own standards are and less beholden to changes in another document that may not have input in. So by aligning that, again, comparable tendering and project delivery standards, clear expectations for contractors and developers, and tried, tested, and true infrastructure standards for performance and life cycle outcomes such as minimizing maintenance cost. There was a comprehensive review of the existing district master plans for water transportation, drainage, area-specific development plans, accessibility plan to supplement the MMCD standards where appropriate for the district's context. And the process to date over the last several months has been a regular working group with district departments to make sure that we're getting feedback from relevant departments such as Public Works and Development Planning so that we've got all the inputs into the standards. If endorsed, the next step for us would be to engage in consultation with the development industry and consulting engineering industry, primarily through the Urban Development Institute organization. Following consultation, we would take that feedback as well as feedback from today's workshop to the internal departments to finalize that bylaw and technical standards to bring back to council for formal consideration. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner, would you lead us off with questions?
Happy to. Thank you, Chair. One question that just came up from your presentation, and thanks for the work. You mentioned a varying standard for kind of suburban standard or shifting, so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Can you just give us a little bit of insight on what you mean? Like, how would we define that suburban standard?
So as proposed in the bylaw, there will be standard cross sections that align with a road classification map from the Transportation Master Plan that would enable staff to know exactly what is planned for every road in the district at the time of development comes. One of the primary challenges that we heard through early engagement on this project was that the time that it took for processing applications was largely due to uncertainty into what should be built where. So bringing that level of prescription or getting to a reasonably good starting point very quickly was a primary objective of this bylaw.
Okay, that's really helpful and leads me into my next set of questions, which the subdivision control bylaw is an extremely technical document. So I really appreciate the update and the work that's going on. I think where I have a challenge is like, where do we sit as council in terms of trying to provide feedback into that? And I think to me, one of the things that I'm missing is kind of almost the problem statement. Like, where are the challenges that we're seeing with our current subdivision and control bylaw? You mentioned in the presentation in the staff report that one of the goals is to improve consistency, transparency, accessibility, and administrative efficiency. And I guess I'm just curious, like, what are our current baseline measures for those things, and how do we know that the updates in the bylaw are improving that over time?
Thank you for the question through the chair. The biggest challenge we have implementing the bylaw now is precisely what Mr. Chapman was just mentioning, is it's a one-size-fits-all. And now, in particular, with the new provincial legislation, we have very hugely varying scale and types of developments that we're having to deal with. So there's a scale piece, the type of development, and there's also the varied nature of infrastructure, existing infrastructure throughout different neighborhoods in town. And when we try to, when we get an application for a fourplex, let's say in Brackendale, we have to look at, well, what do we want this street to be in the future? What could potentially happen here? We have to go through all these scenarios of, do we want to fill in the ditches? Do we want to put a storm sewer? Is there going to be active transportation infrastructure there? These are all things that we have to look at on a case-by-case basis, and it's hugely time-consuming. So there's that's the biggest piece that we're sort of struggling with now. But also the bylaw as it's written is, it really hasn't kept up to date with current standards, with the type of development that we're seeing. So it's on a case-by-case basis. Staff are spending a lot of time working with developers to say, well, what we have in our bylaw right now isn't really what we want to see built. How can we, close that gap? Best practices don't align with what's in our bylaw. So it's hugely inefficient. And with these changes that the team is proposing, that really, there's still going to be a little bit of back and forth, and it's not going to be, just cookie cutter for every single development, but it's going to help staff hugely and the development community in providing clarity on what the developers need to provide and what we need to hold them to.
Okay, that's
then-
really helpful. Yeah,
Sorry, to your second point, sorry. As far as metrics are concerned, I don't have anything here today, obviously. We have a system, our Tempest system, that we track development workflow. It's hard to pull out good quality data. And the issue there is there's so much back and forth currently with development comments. We get a design, we comment on it, they take it away and take however long, come back. So we can track sort of that process generally. Different types of development, different scale. It's hard to really narrow it down and provide good data that we can use as a basis. But I think the key points that inform the challenges are feedback from developers and developers engineers on the process and the ambiguity or unclarity in some of the bylaw language, and also staff, their challenges with interpreting the bylaw and incorporating it into a development scenario.
Okay, thank you for that response. And it was really comprehensive and helped provide some further context to me on how we are approaching this. I don't want poor data to stop us from using it. Like even just the number of times an application has gone back and forth between the proponent and our staff is useful information. And I think it's important that we surface that to decision makers with an asterisk if that's what's necessary, but so that we can then better understand when the proposed bylaw does come forward, how those changes are going to ideally make progress in improving the efficiency of that system. Especially if it's going to come with a request for delegated authority. So I am not like, I see that as a really valuable component to this, especially if the intent is to try and ensure that it can continue to be evergreened. But there needs to be some checks in that in order for the governance side of the organization to be able to ensure that that is actually the outcome that we're achieving. So that is my comment, and thank you for allowing me to go first.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. I'll go to Councillor Pettingill and then to Councillor French.
Yeah, I'll start with maybe a broader question and dig into some specifics of what's behind it. So I'm wondering how involved our sustainability department is in what we're putting into this new bylaw.
Thank you. Through the question, through the chair. Sustainability department, I guess I'll back up and say more generally, we've worked very closely with a wide range of internal stakeholders at this point in time. There's an accessibility review currently being undertaken of the draft bylaw that we have written. Sustainability was brought in early on to inform the bigger picture, where we want to take this, what are some of the key things that we want to incorporate. As Mr. Chapman insinuated, a wide range of stakeholders internally have provided input, and then as we go externally, we hope to get more input on those types of topics.
Okay, so then I have, I guess, some sort of related to that, some questions/comments, and part of it is to help me understand what kinds of things we can possibly achieve with this bylaw. So was looking at a home in a neighborhood, and it didn't come to pass, but they had a sort of a neighborhood geothermal system. And so all the homes could plug into this, and meant the energy costs were like nothing. And it just strikes me as, I think that's, it seems that a subdivision control bylaw could maybe sort of say in this new subdivision, you need to have the geothermal infrastructure. Is that the sort of thing that can be part of a bylaw like this?
Through the chair, unfortunately, the Local Government Act is quite specific in narrowing the authority of a subdivision development control bylaw. It's a narrow scope with a very broad impact, but it is limited to water servicing, fire hydrant servicing, sewer, drainage, roads, and street lighting and underground wiring and boulevard infrastructure. There's a list in section 506 of the Local Government Act. So unfortunately, this bylaw does not have legislative authority to regulate the type of energy supply system for a new development.
Okay, and then related to that, then if it's wiring though, at least, and maybe this isn't the mechanism that's best for this, but sort of ensuring, and maybe this is only for a large subdivision, that there's sufficient EV charging capacity or infrastructure, that sort of thing. Would that go here, or that would have to be somewhere else?
Typically, the requirement to have specific facilities within a building for EV charging comes through a zoning bylaw and land use rather than a engineering infrastructure and servicing bylaw. It has been done and it's very possible to do. It requires close collaboration with BC Hydro. BC Hydro here there may be some trickle-down effects of energization at a larger level and supply and everything down from supply to transmission to distribution and the ability to meet those loads. But again, not typically part of the engineering servicing bylaw. When we say underground wiring, what we mean is really the difference between overhead power lines or underground ducting for those wiring. But the energization of a development is in the realm of the energy provider.
Okay, thank you. And then again, a little bit related, my recollection, maybe I'm incorrect, is that the current iteration of our bylaw requires gas infrastructure, but as we're asking more developers to sign no gas covenants, is it possible to remove that requirement, even discourage it, or are we required to have a gas infrastructure section in that?
Through the chair, the place of this bylaw would be for coordinating of that infrastructure amongst other things. Provision of natural gas is not one of the things that this bylaw is intended to regulate, and the way that it's worded in the proposed bylaw is to say if it is provided, then it must be provided in coordination with these other things. So it doesn't speak to prohibiting or discouraging or enabling natural gas.
Okay, two more, if I may. Just we've been looking at possible speed changes throughout the district, and it sounds like bike path sidewalks may be part of this sometimes. I'm wondering if signage, especially if we find ourselves in a place where we actually need to provide a lot of signage to achieve the sign goals we want to do, or is that sort of thing something that would be handled outside of a subdivision control bylaw?
So, Chair, there certainly is an aspect of transportation servicing and signage that is under the jurisdiction of this bylaw. As any development comes, if it's required to alter or has a material impact on the transportation network, then this bylaw would trigger in for assessing requirements that would need to be changed. Certainly in the context of a greenfield subdivision where there's new roads going in, a signage and pavement marking plan would be part of that submission package. If there was a development that was altering the corner or changing the geometry of the road, then a signage review would happen at that stage. I would say for the conversation around speeds and wholesale changes to how the network functions, that this bylaw is more about how development implements the plans of the district rather than what those plans are. So you would have your transportation master plan that speaks to policy objectives around what roads in the district should be doing different things. And this bylaw is the tool for development to implement those objectives. So there was a list of about 25 or so things in the transportation master plan that had recommendations for this bylaw update that we did capture in there. So we are, as far as development is responsible to implement those objectives, this bylaw captures that, but there's a bigger picture plan in your transportation master plan that speaks to the overall road network.
Okay, and a little bit related, my last one for now. We've received a report on the importance of green canopy, tree canopy, and so on. I take it that the actual trees and so on is probably in landscaping, land development agreement, and so on. But can that or does that sometimes exist in subdivision control bylaw, and or maybe just the soil infrastructure, sort of like minimum soil depth requirements and so on? Is that something that we would expect to see here?
Through Chair, yes, boulevard landscape design and the requirement to provide a treed boulevard is within the scope of this bylaw. The where that standard applies is also part of the bylaw update, and something that is open for feedback on as to where we think that standard of construction should apply, keeping in mind that that does come with capital costs for construction, but is ongoing maintenance costs for the district for those things. So where the bylaw is proposing to have urbanized or treed boulevards where new trees are going in as frontage improvements for development is within the scope of what we're looking at. And that does come with cost ramifications for capital construction as well as ongoing maintenance. If that answers that. So yes, soil provisions, the need for soil volumes for the roots to grow, the planting standards, the species that would be acceptable are all within the realm of this bylaw.
And sorry, just for my clarity, would it go as far as to say you must have X 20-foot trees of maple trees or whatever, or that would be handled elsewhere? It's just the sort of getting the soil and the grading and all that ready for that would be here.
It is within the scope of this bylaw to prescribe the minimum standard for number of trees or size of trees in the boulevard along the frontage, and that is going to be contextual depending on the road classification and location. The bylaw also does defer to where there's neighborhood level plans that speak to that level of detail, that those plans would supersede kind of the default requirements of the bylaw. So there's a lot of work that's been done in a lot of those master plans that does speak to a lot of those details that we pulled from to kind of inform the baseline of this bylaw, but it would be contextual as well.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to get a sense of how adventurous the proposed staff direction is. So is this taking us in a safe and conservative way forward, or are we going to be plowing snow and other communities around the province thinking about updating their bylaws that are similar to these? We'll be watching us over the next few months to see how things go as we've currently got them set with the draft bylaw that you've got.
So through the chair, I think this does come back to the problem statement of why the change. It's as well as who else is doing it this way and what are the risks. So we have we did put a scan together of all municipalities in the region, and it's largely swings in favor of the approach that we're proposing for a number of good reasons that I'll get to. Most municipalities that have their technical standards in bylaw that require a council report to update technical standards, it does seem to be moving in the other direction. And again, so the reasons for that are usually these technical or administrative or housekeeping type updates arise because we've gone to implement, or there's a development that comes in that highlights a clause or some sort of operational constraint, and we're like, oh, that didn't yield the best results. Let's put that on a list to upkeep. You know, that one change doesn't necessarily warrant putting a council report together and coming to update the bylaw. So it goes on a list, and then 10 other things go on the list. And then you've got a list of 280 things that are all minor, mundane, little administrative operational. I'd say probably when we started, of the list of things, upward of about 80 or 85% of them were operational comments from Public Works saying, hey, can we update this on the standard drawing detail, or can we, add this valve to the approved products list or something like that. And so what we see is that a pattern amongst most municipalities is that this large list of minor updates accumulates, and they're all very technical in nature. And the bar to put a package together is very high, and then it ends up being years or decades before it happens. And then you sort of have this shadow realm happening where there's a lot of work happening outside the framework of the bylaw for pragmatic reasons, and that creates a lot of inconsistencies and lack of transparency. And then you get it exposes the district to risk in their development process if they're not following the bylaws. And so practically this approach I would say is best practice for prudence and able to be able to keep the bylaw current. But in terms of what council has input on and ability to have checks and balances and accountability on that, I think that's obviously a very key part of this conversation. So to that end, what stays in the bylaw is development under this zone or this type must be serviced to this standard. Here are the road right-of-ways that have a width that has land impacts and the standard of urbanization that applies to those, which really hits the high-level servicing objectives and the experience of the community. The size of the water main, the brand of the valve, whether it's a precast concrete thrust block or a cast-in-place thrust block, can move to a design criteria manual that is updated regularly by staff under the oversight of the Director of Engineering. And I would say what's similar between the status quo approach or the change is that if council is feeling pressure points around that level of service or inconsistency, the path to address that is the same, whether it's in bylaw or not. It's working through the CAO or providing a resolution to say, hey, staff, we're hearing this, that, or a question. Can you look at this and report back to us for discussion around updates? So there's still that level of accountability either way, but the benefit of the proposed approach is that it keeps it more likely to be updated and house kept at the technical level.
I have
Further
no
question?
follow-ups. Yeah, that's everything. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much. So first, the idea that it doesn't matter. I don't know if a T226 valve is appropriate for a water meter or not. I'm not the right person to ask. So I'm certainly in agreement with this, with the concept of putting those technical details into staff policy and having really the overarching level of standard come to the council table. On that overarching standards question, you mentioned sort of applying appropriate applying suburban standards where appropriate, and I'm trying to get an idea. What does that mean to you in this context, staff and consultants? Can you give me some examples of where in town you might think are appropriate for suburban standards versus some other standard? And my thinking on this is not just what we have now, because if I pick a neighborhood, if I pick Brackendale or Garibaldi Estates, they may have a suburban feel right now, but with the current R1 zoning, and that's partly what's driving this, that changes pretty fundamentally. So how do we, where do we still see this notion of a suburban zone?
Thank you for the question through the chair. So I think one piece that will help answer this question is the component that where there is a neighborhood plan, those standards, provided we have technical standards, which we aim to for our neighborhood plans, those will supersede what's in the bylaw. So for example, the Garibaldi Estates, other neighborhood plans, I'm drawing a blank right now, but let's say, thank you. Those plans often have vetted through council what the streetscape looks like. We've done a servicing study. We know what frontage work needs to be included and stuff like that. So for those type of areas that we're anticipating growth, those are captured largely by the neighborhood planning process, supplemented by what we have in our bylaw. For, let's say, for the road network, Mr. Chapman alluded earlier to working with the transportation master plan, a hierarchy for streets and the design for different types of streets. So we're currently working through with the transportation team on looking at that list of, you know, arterial, collector, local roads, where those are distributed through town, and then what the appropriate standards or level of service are for those roads. So an area like Brackendale, let's say, one road that's a collector road would have a different standard when development occurs on it than a local road in that area, for example. So there are different mechanisms to ensure that the appropriate standards are being applied to different streets and different areas in town. I hope that answers your question.
Sorry, don't we already have that road network definition in the subdivision and control bylaw? And what's the difference? Are we really talking about updating that road map? I'm just trying to find, yeah, it's figure 5.2 in the STC.
Yes, through the chair, as we entered into the review process of what needed to be updated, what we identified was that there is a road classification map in the current bylaw. There's also one in the official community plan, and there's also one in the transportation master plan. And so we were looking to, and they're not 100% in alignment. So what is the authoritative map about what happens, and can we bring that to a single source of truth? So yes, there's an update being proposed to try to bring that to minimize ambiguity.
Is there a proposal for where the single source of truth should be?
Yes, it will is supposed to live in this bylaw. Yeah, as the authoritative. If you're developing and we're asking you to build out a road or a frontage, that map lives in the STC bylaw.
Plans feed into bylaws. Bylaws are the
authoritative.
The authoritative.
Yes.
Okay. And now the idea of evergreening this, we see this challenge with many of our bylaws. It takes quite an effort to evergreen. So what's our plan at a staff level to ensure that we do continue to do this evergreening? I don't recall seeing a budget moving forward in our 10-year financial plan for doing this evergreening. I don't know if it's there and I missed it. What's the plan for ensuring that the evergreening happens?
Thank you for the question through the chair. It's a great question. It's a lot less onerous to evergreen it with this proposed plan as opposed to collecting a list of 200 plus items and then eventually going to council. It's, often when it gets to that point, we need an external consultant to come in to help guide us through the process. With the ability for staff to do it at the staff level, it's not an onerous process. Through the development process, as I mentioned earlier in response to another question, we find these sticking points. We find that, we're always having an issue with this one type of infrastructure. Public Works hates what's being built. That is a simple change. We can take public work input. We can change the drawing detail. We can change the wording in the text to more accurately reflect what we want constructed. And then using the delegated authority, we can make that change with no external funding or no additional funding required. It's just part of the job process.
I would add to that, just to reaffirm Dave's comment there, is that the task of doing some housekeeping updates on the current bylaw was a larger assignment. There were some structural and fundamental issues about updating to meet current legislative standards and set up that kind of wholesale baseline as a good modern approach. So, and we are writing in such a way that we're trying to have it be very easy to be updatable, that the groundwork is there. so that it's easy to come in and tweak that. So even things as simple as having the CAD files for the standard details handy, so we're not, there's that single point of truth. So packaging all that up so it's an easy housekeeping assignment. Yes.
I had that question in my head, but I just don't know if it's like the level of detail that I would need. But when I look at the current subdivision control bylaw, it's photocopies from the MMCD or whatever, and it's really hard to change that, right? So yeah, we would have the CAD files and be able to update images, because I know from a technical standpoint that can be super frustrating where you've got this great image, but then you can't adjust it.
What we see a lot of municipalities do is establish a bit of a working group, representative from various departments, and they may meet quarterly or annually to collect a bit of a list and then deal with it on a quarterly or annually basis. And it becomes a very manageable exercise that doesn't need to be a budgeted line item. It can be a as you go sort of thing.
Great. Thanks very much, Chair.
Other questions, Council? Before I go back to you, Councillor Pettingill, I have a question that arises from your previous line of questioning, and it's probably just a matter of confirming that it has actually been answered. District energy systems has been contemplated by the district, and some of our sub-area plans give reference to the prospect of district energy systems, pipeline networks underground connected to a central boiler unit. I just wanted to confirm that, with reference to your answer to Councillor Pettingill, that it is the jurisdiction or the role of the subdivision development control bylaw is coordination rather than specification of standards and layout for, say, a pipeline grid. Is that correct?
Chair, as I understand it, yes, with the caveat that it is prescriptive on standards for District of Squamish owned infrastructure. If it's infrastructure to be owned by BC Hydro or a private utility provider, then the role would be coordination rather than specification of standards. The MMCD design guidelines, which are the basis of the technical standards, do have a section on district energy, and the proposal for the current bylaw design criteria manual is to bring that forward as more of a reference to say, we acknowledge that this exists and may be proposed by a development. If you propose, then here's the questions we want answered, and the coordination work that would have to happen is the proposal under the current bylaw date.
Thank you. I have one more question before I go back to Councillor Pettingill. This concerns engagement, plan engagement strategy, industry consultation. Now, some of our developer companies locally, and in fact even significant developer companies, are not members of the Urban Development Institute. And but I just was wondering if that will be, consideration will be given to this in the form of, for example, an open call for input from such stakeholders.
At this time, the plan was not for a publicly available open for comment section. It would be targeted engagement to development industry and the consulting engineering industry. That is appreciated feedback. The intent at this time was to reach out to Urban Development Institute and local consulting firms, and that's feedback we can take to make sure that we're reaching out to other major players as well.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just Councillor Anderson made me, I guess, unsure of something I'd asked before. So is geothermal seen the same way as district energy? And so it is a thing where we cannot mandate, we would coordinate if it happened, and that's, or is there something fundamentally different where community energy could be mandated through a sub, but geothermal couldn't?
I would put to the council that if geothermal or district energy is something that you would want a developer to consider, that the best place for that would be in dialogue with BC Hydro and through a neighborhood planning process. These systems don't work on a one-off basis. They need a community level buy-in. And so if it was council's desire to move that forward as a a district position to say we want to see these in our new communities, that this bylaw would not be the place to just stick it in. It would need to be a larger coordinated initiative.
Okay, thank you. The other piece then, there has been a few things, and I'll say undergrounding power lines is a big one where I think there's a political component to it, and it's expensive, but it has been seen as important. That sort of potential change, if any, is that something that would come back to council? How would that be surfaced, or how do we expect to deal with some of those things that come up in conversation from time to time?
Thank you for the question through the chair. There's no proposed changes to how we currently approach it, which is in situations where a neighborhood has underground power, we want developments to underground it. Downtown and is an example. If a development occurs where there's overhead power, the developer is required to underground it where possible. That would be an instance, I would say, referring back to Mr. Chapman's comment earlier, where if there is an observed or a desire heard from the community that is strong and differs from what we have in our bylaw, that could be an opportunity where council through the appropriate channels could come and ask staff for an update and potentially to discuss a potential change.
And if I could add to that, maybe just a bit of a clarification to keep in mind. The bylaw that will come to you for adoption will have in a table where new power servicing needs to be underground or overhead, and that will be either based on zone or an area, a geographic area, or as specified in a neighborhood plan. It's certainly a hot topic because it's very expensive, but it also has a high visual impact and level of quality. There are some functional considerations as well around this. For example, there are setbacks from power lines for buildings, and if a developer is proposing to build an apartment building and there happens to be power, they may have to underground those if they want their building in that location. So I should say this bylaw prescribes standards for new infrastructure, which would say that buildings should be serviced by underground wiring, not new overhead infrastructure. But the need to underground pre-existing that isn't already otherwise is very difficult to do on a development by development basis and should be part of a larger neighborhood strategy.
Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, yes, on this, and this is not actually the question on the table, but just for my understanding, what is our current practice? For example, I'm thinking about a fourplex that just went up at Depot and Government. Would a development like that need to underground? Did they have to underground the wires? 'Cause I'm thinking about Government Road. The power lines are it's more than just visual. It's stopping us from putting sensible active transportation in there. So is undergrounding required currently in that type of development?
Thank you for the question through the chair. I'm struggling to remember exactly what happened with that one particular development. I wasn't involved. That was before my time in this role. With that said, and as Ms. Bailey just whispered over the table, we deal with BC Hydro on all these undergrounding and new hydro services, obviously. BC Hydro has certain conditions where they will actually allow undergrounding. They'll require it in a case where it's too close to a building, for example. If there's one development on a stretch where there is overhead power, it's unlikely that Hydro will want to underground a short section on a long stretch. I would suspect in that instance where it's a long overhead power system that we probably wouldn't require undergrounding. It would be a case-by-case situation. However, hopefully with the bylaw update, we'll have clarity on that.
Yeah, for sure. It's it often comes down to a case by case. There are delineations you can do by voltage of the wiring because sometimes the standards get more expensive. What we can find too is that the BC Hydro will just say like, no, we don't, we don't want that. I would say that this bylaw and the task force here is to say, what do you want implemented through development? What do you want the fourplex to have to deliver as a standard of construction, as a condition of development approval? And if that is, we want you to underground a large section of transmission mains, you won't get any infill development, right? The bar is too high. There are elements of works and services that are, I should say, delivered through development as one of the tools in the toolbox to build out the community the way you want to see it to be. If that includes areas where you want to have undergrounded power lines, it is not very feasible to have that done on an individual development segment by segment basis. It is a lot more cost effective to undertake that as a larger capital project and potentially recover through other mechanisms through growth, or I should say there's a number of tools in the toolbox for the district to deliver infrastructure at that scale, but it is very difficult to have small scale infill development do that on a case by case basis.
Mayor Herford.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Sarah Bailey, Director of Engineering. I just wanted to add a few things. The hydro in particular, undergrounding the overhead utilities is something that we try and keep a very close eye on because it is expensive and it does affect the performance of that building. So we have in the past tried to make reasonable decisions. We're hoping through the bylaw with something that we put on paper then that we can actually go back and reevaluate. There, as far as the tools in the toolbox that we have, if it's a stretch where we want to see the undergrounding, but we have external factors, as it's been mentioned, BC Hydro doesn't want to see that on a short length. What we discuss internally is what's available to us. So can we put in the ducting in advance that will allow those cables to go through in the future? Do we take cash in the interim? Are we making sure we have an allowance for it? So the hydro is something that's always on our mind due to the space requirement within the boulevard. And it's so we keep it in mind always, no matter what. But it is a challenging one, certainly due to the cost and constraints, external constraints. So it's one that I think we will come back with once we've got this sorted, maybe with future direction from council, once we get this sort of up and running and are able to provide a little bit more transparency around it.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey.
Is undergrounding part of our DCC list? Is it a valid DCC project or not?
No.
Mayor Herford.
I think a follow-up to that is, could it be?
Ms. Glendy.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I just want, I think that's interesting. I think I've enjoyed the conversation so far, and I understand that there's other places that sort of a lot of the things that we're interested in regulating live, and this is really the tool to do that rather than to introduce new pieces. I wondered about this underlining it of power lines is one thing, but you've highlighted a few times the importance of neighborhood plans, and we have them for some areas. As an organization, I don't know that we've contemplated this aspect of it to the same amount. And could someone give me some context here around those places that don't have a neighborhood plan? There was the OCP outlines, the ones that were sort of the next order of operations, but that doesn't cover the entirety of the community. And now with the provincially driven policy around housing, we're likely to see development occur in areas that don't have those specific neighborhood plans. So how do we fill that gap
Thank you for the question. And I think that's exactly the gap that we were trying to fill with this update is in the absence of some of these neighborhood plans or higher level documents, under the current framework, there isn't a lot of direction around what should happen where. That is the level of prescription we're trying to bring with this update, so that we've got standard road cross sections that are contextual at a high level. It's a bunch of work. We're going through all of the roads and looking at them and trying to say what should be what as implemented through redevelopment. So I think what we'll end up with at the end of this process is a good roadmap, so that if an infill development is happening in an area outside of a neighborhood plan, they've got clear direction and a clear standard of construction for what we want those roads and servicing to look like. That enables us to get through the process efficiently. That being said, there are going to be areas or streets that emerge as being higher importance, or as things are dynamic. That doesn't preclude our ability to come back and say, hey, for this street, we'd like X, and that can happen easily if it needs to be. But in those areas outside those master plans, we are bringing forward a comprehensive classification cross section, layering to that, so that there's clear direction in those areas.
Yeah, I like the direction here and how that the decisions are being made at the right time by the right folks. And I agree this table's not likely the best place for some of these very technical examples that were provided. This broader piece around areas that don't have neighborhood plans and all of our objectives as a municipality, whether it's the housing accelerator work or so on, like, I think that there's a lot of questions and likely conflicting goals in some of these things. And I'm really curious what a next step, like, how do you aim to resolve those things? Like in our DCC bylaw, for instance, we debate the municipal assistance piece. And I think a similar concept sort of applies here. What is the broader community looking at doing considering as a capital project versus, what can reasonably be expected for development to cover, and just how, like, that level, those concepts are the pieces of this work that I'm having a challenge with, not so much the new format and the broad and the delegation associated with it. But I think a lot of those things aren't necessarily captured in with what I've heard so far. Just how do we untangle that, and how do we aim to do that over the project, given the short period of time that we're seeing as a timeline?
So if I understand your question, it's I think what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of uncertainty around competing priorities, and that takes a lot of work to reconcile those around council and staff table. And I think that's the difficulty, which is the problem statement of this update. So the task of this bylaw is to say, through redevelopment and growth, what do you want the infrastructure and the frontage to look like? The OCP says there's certain areas of the city where we want to have a really good look at that and have some unique aspects to this neighborhood build out. In the absence of that, the transportation section of the bylaw will pull from those best practices and policies to say, hey, if you are building a new greenfield neighborhood, here are the objectives and policy considerations and design considerations around that layout and standard of construction and intersection details and crosswalks and curb bulb outs at mid-block crosswalks. All those things still get looked at. But what the bylaw does is say, these are the things you need to consider and show that you've thoughtfully put through in the bylaw. And then that comes to staff to review to say, have they done a good job with this proposal? A lot of the same questions that get asked at that neighborhood planning level, but they happen at an application by application level with staff. And what's most helpful is to have a clear set of criteria that you're evaluating those decisions against, which is the task of this bylaw, is to spell out what those expectations are, so that both applicants and staff have consistent, clear criteria to evaluate these decisions on. Will that yield unique, funky, dynamic urban streets all over the city? No, that's not what it's intended to do. What it's intended to do is bring a base level of functionality, and that minimum standard that we talked about at the beginning is the role of council is to define a minimum standard that development needs to meet to service. So that's what this bylaw delivers. And if there's something above that minimum that you're wanting to have implemented, then that requires another process outside of this bylaw, which sets that base standard.
If I may just add briefly to that, that was excellent. Thank you. There's also sort of the bigger picture layer of the master plans that we have, transportation, linear infrastructure, accessibility, those type of things. And there's the role of the capital committee that sort of ties the pieces all together. We're working on DCC strategies. So there's a lot of interaction between DCC's projects and development, capital projects as well, all informed by those master plans. And it all comes together at that capital committee, which the development is layered into. So that's a good tool that we have currently to make sure that all these competing interests are accounted for and align with one another.
So, okay, that all makes good sense. I just pull an example I think of is, say, affordable housing, below market housing. We've talked about waiving certain requirements. Would that still be, would that concept be captured here, or would that still be a decision of council informed by, or is that something that handled through another process?
But I couldn't talk to specific or case-by-case examples, but the approach of the bylaw, and this would be defined in the bylaw itself, is that when an application comes in, there's an assessment, and under legislation, the authority of this bylaw is limited to what is directly attributable to that development based on the level of service defined. So if a development were to come in and it's grant funded or a partnership project or something like that, there's most of what's in the bylaw are sort of non-negotiables. You need water service, you need a sewer service. Where it gets a bit more room to play is in that standard of road frontage construction, say. And so, but even then there's some minimum level of functionality for drainage infrastructure and access and to the site. So there's often very little room to play with eliminating requirements assessed under this development framework, because by nature it is a minimum standard for directly attributable servicing needs. That being said, if the standard had called for sidewalk and a street trees and boulevard and new curb and gutter and a boulevard, and the district wanted to waive that, there is discretion built into the bylaw for the servicing officer or approving officer to assess requirements and see if appropriate. If council wanted to fund through a grant or something to have that built, but be funded through another source rather than the developer, that could also be a tool too. In terms of how that may be assessed on a case-by-case basis, I could defer to staff, but that would be the approach in the bylaw.
Ms. Bailey.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So we have the authority to vary the requirements of the bylaw. We make that decision practically if there's something that is not absolutely required. As Mr. Chapman has stated, many things are sort of mandatory and you need them. Maybe to provide you some reassurance, we wouldn't waive any requirements without coming back to council if there was if the intention behind it was to support affordable housing. We would come to council for that decision. If we're waiving or changing our requirements, it's more from a technical side, and we feel that that's appropriate because there's technical reasons for that. But if we were doing it for any other reason, we wouldn't be doing that without council's guidance.
Okay, thank you. And I think that understanding where that line is, that explanation makes good sense to me, and just having that articulated in a way that, like with other levels of delegation, we've, whether it's over a threshold or what for a purpose or whatever that criteria is, I think would go a long way to give comfort to everyone as to like what the path is for something like that to occur. So thank you. And
Council, we do have.
I was going to move if we're ready for that, Chair.
We do have another item on our agenda. I have an additional question of my own, but I'm going to go quickly to Councillor Pettingill if you have a quick question that can be addressed relatively efficiently. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. Just in this whole area, and so we're trying something a little bit new for us here. Where is the point at which this bylaw applies, this sort of particular version? Like, a rezoning, once you put in your application, it's that version of the zoning that applies. If we're working through this and we see, ooh, we didn't think that was going to happen, we want to change something, can we still do that up to a certain point? Or it's like when you put in your application, the developers is sort of held account to the version of the bylaw that was in place when the application came in, or do we know?
There are a variety of development applications that come to council, and they would all get circulated through the engineering department for comments, but this specific bylaw is applicable to subdivision approvals and building permit issuances. So at what stage in the process those requirements get assessed can vary by application. Typically, when somebody comes in for a form and character development permit, engineering would comment to say essentially, when you apply for a building permit, here's the requirements under this bylaw, so that there's a heads up. But formally the authority triggers as a condition of subdivision approval or building permit issuance.
A question of my own here. We are often called the natural hazards capital of Canada. We have significant topographical constraints for our future residential development areas on the hillsides. About 2 years ago, staff engaged in a exploration of new cold climate road standards, new hillside road standards, which presumably would be integrated with this subdivision development control bylaw. There is a concern that these new standards, which might involve lowering maximum grades for collector roads, local roads, and for bridges, may in some cases have a significant impact in terms of sterilizing land otherwise proposed for development. Some of these lands on the hillsides are owned by the Squamish Nation. There are other large landowners that may be affected. My concern that I wish to have addressed or alleviated is it would seem to me that such sterilization of land on a significant scale should come back to council for council's review and deliberation. I wonder if Mr. Marrow, if you may be able to comment on that concern.
Thank you. To you, Chair. So the exercise that you referenced that as part of the neighborhood planning process, the applicant and their team developed these steep slope standards that were based on the MMCD cold climate criteria. And the process to get to those draft standards, which are the intent is that they're incorporated into the bylaw, we had a multi-stakeholder engagement on that. The critical components for that decision-making process were emergency services and public works. And through gained experience over, the lifetime of Squamish, we understand what types of roads, what grades, what intersection geometry we can effectively respond to clear salt sand to make safe for people to travel on. There are existing roads that have been designed in the district that are incredibly challenging and take a huge amount of effort and quick responsiveness to get to during either a snowfall event or just a wet freeze thaw event. So the intention of implementing these standards is to ensure that Public Works can actually safely manage these roads in our climate, and that emergency services are able to access these new neighborhoods. And those two go hand in hand, obviously. That's the intention. With respect to how council weighs in on that topic, the thought at the time was that it would come through the neighborhood planning process. That would be as part of that process is stalled out. We would I think, I don't know what the correct process would be, but if there are concerns with the approach that we're taking and the impacts on developable land, I think the conversation needs to be had and needs to be weighed against safety, public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Marrow. Are we ready for a motion on the staff recommendation? Mayor Herford?
Thank you. I'll move all three pieces of the staff recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Hamilton. Any further discussion? Mayor Herford.
Just briefly, thank you for the work on this to date. I'm supportive of this broadly of this approach. I mean, this is about the fine details, so I'd like to understand. I know at next touch points we'll get into that, but this does feel like an appropriate sort of evolution of this as we grow as a community and in the volume of development that we've been experiencing. So I see it in many aspects of our organization, but I really like seeing the sort of identifying a room for process improvement, taking those lessons learned and improving said process, which is where I'm scoring where we are right now. So happy to support and look forward to next steps on this. And thank you for your work so far.
Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, happy to support this at a sort of high level. Appreciate what's being done here. I think it makes sense to delegate the technical stuff. I am sort of want to make sure that when this comes back to us, the things that do have more of a public impact, and maybe that is more boulevards or some of the maybe street widths or some of these sort of experiential things, even undergrounding where there's cost aspects, that those things, especially if there's changes, but maybe even where changes are warranted, those are highlighted when those come back to council for us to think about. And, you know, I appreciate there's a lot of industry consultation on the technical pieces, but shouldn't lose sight of more broader public consultation on some of the more public impacting things. Again, without wanting to overburden this, you know, that may be an obstacle depending on what the final thing looks like. And I just have to take the bait on Councillor Anderson. I think another aspect of some of these steep slopes roads is, you know, are we designing communities that are just inherently difficult for active transportation and so on. And so I think there are some of those considerations when we get to that specific topic.
Councillor Hamilton?
Yeah, thanks very much. Certainly in support of staff's approach on this. I think that the delegation of the administrative and the technical, particularly the technical engineering components, make absolute sense. This subdivision control bylaw is the confluence of many different master plans, and it pretty much any master plan we approve, any plan we approve is going to touch the subdivision control bylaw in some way. And that effectively triggers work, extra work coming to council on each master plan. So definitely supportive of that move. And yes, absolutely proceeding with industry consultation. That's an important piece of it. Thanks.
Very good. I'd like to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Kay, Mr. Chapman, Mr. Marrow, that was a very informative exchange. Now we have two staff members that have been waiting very patiently for us for the next item, which is the consideration of the Lower Mainland Local Government Association and UBCM resolution process. Now, staff probably have some orientation and updates about process forthcoming and in this matter of considering resolutions. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Jenny Franks, Legislative Assistant to Mayor and Council in the Corporate Administration Department.
Through the chair, I'm Kyla Larson, Executive Assistant to CAO and General Manager of Community Services.
Today, we're going to look at a review of the local government resolutions process, a little bit about the dates for the District of Squamish in that process, a current resolution recommendation that we have, and then we can have some council discussion. So our local governments are given the opportunity to advocate to the provincial government for improvements to policy or legislation. A resolution was passed last year in 2025, which applies a new framework to ensure resolutions are focused on new issues within local government scope, province-wide in nature, and clearly written. Basically, the resolutions first go to a regional or area association, of which we are in the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, or LMLGA. At that LMLGA conference, all members vote on endorsing resolutions, which are then forwarded to Union of BC Municipalities, or UBCM. At the UBCM conference, all elected municipal officials in BC are invited to debate and vote on the proposed resolutions. And if they are successful, they're presented to the province, whom indicates if and how they will work towards addressing the resolution requests. Today, council can decide on which resolutions they would like to work on. Then on February 10th, we'll have another meeting again, another committee of the whole, where we can finalize the wording and vote on specific resolution submissions. And then the ratification of the successful resolutions will be on February 17th. And then the deadline for submitting them is March 5th. The current resolution recommendation that we have so far is the preservation and revitalization of the Squamish Caribou Rail Corridor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments at this time from staff? Oh, so, excuse me, from council colleagues? I have indeed circulated a resolution that's titled Preservation and Revitalization of the Squamish Caribou Rail Corridor. It is a draft that has been prepared in consultation with the local West Coast Railway Association and informants from the Caribou, including municipal councillors and a couple of mayors have been involved in conversations over recent weeks. Our railway was built in 1910. The government took it over in 1918, and we've been in conversations with our railway line other communities ever since. And here we are again. It is my suggestion that this resolution be approached in collaboration with other railway communities to the north of us. And we have good precedents for this. For example, BC Rails, or the PGE earlier, did not pay property tax. And this is a long-standing beef of the District of Squamish, which had significant railway-owned lands. And we worked together with the communities to the north of us, in particular Lillooet, Williams Lake, and Quesnel, some 25 years ago, to have this addressed. And this is the background to the fee in lieu of property tax arrangement that we have with the railway company today, BC Rail Properties today. So here we are again in need of, I suggest, of collaborating with these other railway communities to secure the fate or determine the fate of the railway. Now, CN has announced last summer in July that it wishes to terminate its lease for the railway line, which stretches from approximately Mamquam River all the way north to 100 Mile House. In the past, the going further north to Williams Lake has been discussed and might potentially be considered in future, as there are no longer any significant shippers from here to Williams Lake with the closure of recent mills. So this resolution Also, in my presentation of it refers to other municipalities and local or regional municipal associations. And it is my suggestion that we see if we can give some kind of preliminary endorsement to what we have here in front of us, or any, of course, any recommendations that my colleagues may have, so that it can be circulated to those communities to the north of us. Already, Councillor Klassen of the City of Prince George and the Mayor of Quesnel are volunteering to take this resolution in broadly this wording to their respective councils for further delivery to the Northern Communities Local Government Area, if I get that acronym right. And then there is also the SILGA, the Southern Interior Local Government Association, which includes Lillooet, our regional district, as well as Clinton. So the effort here is intended to be collaborative, but it starts here in Squamish. And I've also passed on some notes about what's in it for Squamish. Squamish will be the big winner if we can save this railway and have a new operator in the form of a short line operator taking over. And the reason for this is because of the infrastructure investments that would be made would be necessary for that new operator in the form of shop facilities, port facility upgrades, and both at Site B and Squamish terminals. We have new jobs that may arise, including for Squamish Station members. Anyway, I've circulated a list of these considerations, and they include future passenger rail and future tourist railway as well. We also have long-standing interest in Squamish Yards and in convincing senior government to make investments in the Squamish Yards. And we have an interest in other upgrades in highway access, the Loggers Lane corridor downtown, and our second access into downtown. All of this is part of a bigger picture that we would probably benefit from having a revitalized railway to provide better rationale in our negotiations with senior government for investments in these projects. Over to council then for any questions or comments. Mayor Herford.
Thank you. I think this topic is worth our continued advocacy on. We've had some exchange with the province by way of letter on this. I'm challenged with this mechanism for this, however, given that the goal of these resolutions ultimately is to land on the agenda of the to be debated at UBCM convention in September. We know that some key time period or some key points in time will have been passed in this process by the time we get there. So one is the timing piece. I believe it is July, where there'll be some sizable decisions made potentially here. So advocacy on this broadly, yes. This mechanism with this ask, I'm struggling to see the benefits. So have you and the folks you've been discussing this with discuss that timing piece and the process that to get this to ultimately to be supported by UBCM membership?
Thank you for that question, Mayor Herford. To the best of my knowledge, there is not necessarily a firm timeline for the next steps that CN, together with the provincial government, may take. The provincial government, that is the owner of the railbed. The best information that I have comes from the West Coast Railway Association, who have discussed this with the BC Rail Properties. And the answer received was that BC Rail Properties has no timeline indicated from CN from their end as to the next steps when they may schedule those steps. And one of the local directors of the West Coast Railway Association happens to be also affiliated with the Rocky Mountaineer tourist train program, and they're of course directly affected by this. They would not be able to offer one of their routes, and so they were particularly concerned about this timeline, the issue. And so this is the best information we have, and all we can is have further consultations with not only these stakeholders but also the province. But we don't know, and but there isn't a firm schedule for the next step CN may do. There is the anticipation that they are interested, would be interested in the salvage of the steel that is assumed. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I have some thoughts or questions about this, and then sort of more broadly about the LMLJ process. So maybe start quickly with the bigger picture. So we've done a lot of work now with all the new housing regulations, and I think we've had some resolutions coming out of that. You know, there's the government road property with supportive housing and so on. And so I think lots of experiences. Where or how, or does staff have anything that they think we might be worth bringing forward, and how do we sort of hear about that?
Any comments, Ms. Franks?
Through the chair, I didn't have any direct recommendations from staff regarding resolutions.
Okay. All right. So that's helpful. And just, yeah, make sure that we're sort of not missing an opportunity, and you know, maybe my colleagues are sort of well aware of the things that we need to be asking about. I know for me, and I don't have a resolution ready yet because I'm still trying to understand, there does seem to be some people in different areas concerned about air quality, and you're seeing it up in Kitimat with sort of failure of infrastructure now resulting in really terrible air quality for 3+ years, it sounds like, and no mechanism to deal with that adequately from a citizen perspective. I know in the Fraser Valley, there are some concerns about lack of regulation or application of regulation around incineration and so on. And so there do seem to be some air quality gaps. And so I'm trying to have some conversations to understand exactly what those gaps are and if there is something useful we can do there. So I may propose something in that area. And sorry, Councillor Anderson, I guess for me, I would like to have a bit more clarity on why a transition to a short line operator model, as opposed to we need someone or someones to provide these services to us. And if there's a certain reason why short line, and maybe this isn't a backgrounder, but to me, as I read this, is not obvious. Another thought is I would be sort of mortified if the end result of all this is like, oh, Squamish is BC's newest coal port. And so is there some additional language around there maybe to help me feel comfortable in that aspect?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Pettingill. First of all, why a short line operator is that the Class 1 operator, we only have two, CP Kansas City and CN, are clearly not motivated to continue operating on this line. This has been clear for a number of years. In fact, as of 2020, they've discontinued operations for the most part on this line. And although in 2021, the line was brought back into use during that weather pattern that we had there that was very disruptive for the whole transportation system. A short line operator then is because there is a new situation today with the available types of freight with the situation of our forest industry at the present time. So the horizon looks for the present time that it is most amenable to a short line operator, and the main Class 1 operators are not interested, and that's fairly clear from them. There are, in fact, some short line operators that have expressed interest and are in dialogue with the Northern Development Initiative Trust consultation process that is underway, project that is underway. With respect to the other question, we actually have some local guidelines and policy, not only on our part, but on the part of the Squamish Nation. The Squamish Nation owns Site B via an agreement with the province, and as part of that agreement, they have control over the types of freight that could be handled in port operations at Site B, and they've explicitly excluded coal. However, we must consider that Squamish Terminals in handling pulp has some constraints in what they can otherwise handle. And if there's anything that involves dust like pellets or some more bulk commodities, they may not be compatible with the freight that they already carry there. So these are two complementary facilities, and we will have the Squamish Nation and our own marine planning and Squamish Nation's marine planning that will give us guidelines on this. I suggest that it would not be a convenient or necessary to include language on types of freight in this particular proposed resolution. Stoner? Mayor Herford?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, just on the draft resolution as presented, just a few comments. Folks may have remembered that last year we adopted an extraordinary resolution at UBCM that added new lenses within which all resolutions will be filtered through, one of which is ensuring that they're provincially relevant. So while I very much appreciate that there's a time-sensitive nature to the Squamish Caribou Rail Corridor, including that in the title as is, I think will likely exclude it from it being provincially relevant. So I don't know if there's lessons learned here or systems change that we're looking for from the experience that we're having with CN Rail that we could apply more broadly. And further to that, I think some feedback that I would have is in the therefore be it resolved clause. Typically, we ask that it be specific on what UBCM or the area associations be asked to advocate for. And you can have two therefore be it resolved clauses, enactment clauses. And so I would just try and strengthen what it is that we're actually asking for and who are we asking to do it.
Thank you for that feedback, Councillor Stoner. I will deliver this feedback to other consultation partners. Firstly, what we might do is highlight or draw attention to, there's a line here, transportation corridor redundancy affecting Western Canada. And in the therefore be it resolved clause, the reference to the strategic redundancy of the line. This is where we have the provincial interest at stake. The folks in Prince George are quite convinced that this line is necessary from that perspective. In 2004, there was a series of snow avalanches along the CN and CP lines in the southeast part of the province. And the BC Rail line at that time came into play urgently. And it was a massive disruption, and it led to all kinds of initiatives on the part of the province and the federal government in terms of port strategy and trade corridor strategy, and a memorable event. And so this happens probably every decade, that our line here comes into is required to handle that Class 1 freight to the Port of Vancouver. But what we can do is take your comments and deliver them to our conversation partners and see how we might draw better attention to that provincial interest in how we present this resolution. And we can also take your advice on the option of introducing two clauses there at the end to make it more clear. Thank you. Mayor Herford.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess one of the questions is to staff here. Do we have time limits on the minister meeting requests? These are often sort of considered as we do this which category this goes in. Is this something that we want to put in a resolution, or is this something that is more of a meeting request? That happens quite a bit later in process. Is that correct? I just want to.
Through the chair, you're correct. I think I just booked the first minister meetings for March. We don't have any of the deadlines yet.
Okay, no, that's fine. So the my colleague Councillor Pettingill was talking about air quality gaps. I'd be happy to work with my colleague on that and try to bring something back the next opportunity we discuss this. For this particular one that we have in front of us, sort of yes to what I've heard so far as cleaning up the title to make sure that we really lean into the provincial importance of this. I think the what we're asking for piece needs to really stand alone, because often that's all that we see. That's what will be presented on the screen. Generally at UBCM is the therefore bit during the debate. I think that we've to date this body has been advocating for a process and highlighting that there isn't a process. This sort of suggests a process or an outcome of a process, which is great. But I think after the statement that says including First Nations, I think that is a second whereas that we should, or second therefore, sorry, that we should really be debating. Like, do we want to suggest what outcomes are the short line operator model, and what it does? I think it's too much. I think we can clean this up, and maybe even it just ends at the end of inclusive First Nations to decide the future of, or to something like that, rather than getting into all the suggestions and the extra languages that is here. So I think for the purpose of this meeting, if we can endorse that this is something we should advocate for and then work together, we're not going to resolve this issue or the exact wording of this resolution as we sit here. So I'm supportive of this. I do think it needs some sort of general cleaning up, and it may need to be broken into two therefores at the end, which we can debate. And I would suggest that perhaps we only endorse one therefore of that. So I'm supportive of both of these things that we've broadly have been brought up here so far, and this new lens of a resolution that hasn't been considered in the last 5 years. There's been a lot of resolutions, including a lot from this organization, and it's really pared back. So I think these two topics we have are sort of emergent in nature and timely. And I'm sure that there's a path through with these to turn these into resolutions. So anyways, that's my two bits on this. And and I don't know that we need to put through the same I understand having the same topic advocated for in broadly the same sort of direction, but I don't know that we need to match the wording, because perhaps this is more important to those other organizations, different aspects of this. But thank you.
If I may, I'll just comment on your observations, Mayor Herford. Firstly, this document has been circulated to council members as well as members of the Regional District Board, and it's from the Northern Development Initiative Trust regarding this project. And the project involves, there is an envoy working for the project assigned to liaise with First Nations. And the objective that's set is a letter of understanding signed by a majority of First Nations. There have already been First Nations give indication that they're prepared to support and sign, in particular from Lillooet. And there will be further meetings scheduled, including with the Squamish Nation and the Tsleil-Waututh down on our end, so that issue of engagement with the First Nations, and there is an explicit objective of investigating a First Nations ownership model. And there are others across in other parts of the country, in particular Quebec. On the other 2 points, there's 3 elements to the final clause there. And one, the transition to a short line operator, the reason it is considered that this is important is because it's a difficult issue. We have federal policy that is not as friendly as it could be in relations between a short line operator and a Class 1 railway. The Class 1 railways really would not be inclined to, well, they don't want to, I don't want to characterize CN and CP, but relative to the United States, where short line operators are welcomed, and there's legislation to support that, and collaboration, shared track usage, and so on. In Canada, the legislation really needs some work. And this has also been identified in a federal commission looking at railway service levels just from a few years ago, addressing short-line operators, that there's still work to be done, including consultation with short-line operators. So that the fact that we have a gap and a problem, for example, here in Squamish, if a short-line operator comes in, what is CN going to say about usage of their track that they still retain a lease on? Track leading to our port or to the Port of Vancouver. These are very important issues. The other matter concerning maintenance. This is the big question for preserving this line. Who and how is maintenance going to be paid? Because maintenance has been neglected. And this is a major topic, a major challenge. It's not such a big deal as it is in Vancouver Island, where it's a more prominent issue. But because of the prominence of these two concerns, who and how is maintenance taken care of, and that transition and lacking policy for introducing a short line operator. Those are my observations, but I'll take away your concerns and relay them to the conversation partners in the resolution. I may offer to Councillor Pettingill regarding air quality that we have an air quality management plan that's was overseen by a society, but it's still under the auspices of the Ministry of Environment. And that can be part of the information that we can bring forward in the process of crafting a legislation, just to see what is the baseline today. I was a part of the evaluation of the wood fiber LNG project 10 years ago when I was part of that society that oversaw that air quality management plan. So there is some orientation that we can get reacquainted with on the relative or the various the scope and jurisdiction of the at the present time of the Ministry of Environment and under that air quality management plan for the region. Thank you. Pose to our staff what we're looking at here. And before I forget, I really do, and I'm sure my colleagues as well, appreciate this schedule of past resolutions. That's really a very useful document for us going forward. And kudos to you on that. Now, I'm not sure what we can do at this time. Is a motion really in order to give some endorsement to proceed further on this resolution? Perhaps not. That's not necessary at this time. So unless there's other comments or questions, Councillor Pettingill.
Sorry, maybe I missed it. Just for clarity then, is the sort of next discussion point likely this second Tuesday in February? Is that on these resolutions? I heard the 10th. Okay.
Well then, unless there are further comments or questions, I suggest that our discussion has been fairly useful, and we'll be back and even more ready for next time around with perhaps another resolution topic to consider and more work done on the present one. Thank you very much, and we'll entertain a motion to call it quits for today. That was Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, everyone.